Innocent. By Marauder Lover 7. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4, Privet Drive, were happy to say they were perfectly normal, thank you very much. The same could not be said for their 8-year-old nephew, but his godfather wanted him anyway. P.S. Happy Father's Day 2020, from Sierra and Jeremy. Chapter 1, The Prisoner.
Is that seat taken?
Sirius Black asked.
No.
A scrawny boy with messy, black hair said.
You can sit down if you like.
Thank you, Sirius said, sitting.
You're welcome,
said the sandy-haired boy by the window. He turned and gave Sirius a half-smile and then quickly went back to staring at the platform.
You're black, aren't you?
The black-haired boy said. Sirius sighed but didn't deny it.
I'm serious,
he said, picking at his robes.
James
Potter said, grinning. He held out his hand and Sirius shook it.
That's Remus.
Remus, the boy by the window, turned again and gave Sirius a real smile this time and shyly offered his hand. Sirius shook it, smiling back.
And we don't know her name.
Sirius turned, noticing the other occupant of the compartment for the first time. It was a girl with bright red hair, green eyes, and a miserable, teary expression. She sniffled what could have been a greeting or what could have been nothing at all, and Sirius nodded in her general direction before he turned back toward James and Remus. Remus had produced a battered copy of the Standard Book of Spells and was now reading it with a fascinated expression. James peered over at the page and wrinkled his nose.
Erg. Curse of the Bogies,
he said with a delicate shudder.
Curse of the what?
Sirius asked, eyes wide. James poked Remus.
Hey, Remy, show Sirius.
Remus looked up, startled.
Pardon?
James tugged the book out of the other boy's hands and passed it to Sirius, who made a face at the gruesome picture and pushed it away. James gave the heavy tome back to Remus with a grin. Sirius watched their casual interaction with a twinge of jealousy. The only friends he had ever had were his awful cousins and the spoiled pure-blood children his parents forced him to be nice to when their social circle got together. The compartment door slid open to admit a gangly boy with greasy hair. Sirius opened his mouth to say hello, but the boy went straight to the crying girl as if she was the only one there. Feeling lonelier than ever, Sirius made a face and turned back to James and Remus.
How long have you two known each other?
About 10 minutes, James said, shrugging. Sirius felt marginally better. Remus marked his page and glanced at his watch.
12 minutes, actually.
James laughed.
Fine. We'll call it 11. I'm telling you it's 12,
Remus said.
11.
James sang, lying down on his seat. The crying girl and her friend gave him an annoyed look and shifted over to make room for his feet. Sirius grinned.
I'd be listening to, Remus, was it? He's got a watch.
He and the sandy-haired boy shared a grin.
Fine,
James said, making a face at the ceiling of the compartment.
12 minutes. 13, now actually,
Remus corrected, looking apologetic. James groaned and then perked up.
Slither in?
He said in response to something the Snape boy had said.
Who'd want to be in Slytherin?
He asked, sitting up.
I think I'd leave, wouldn't you?
Sirius saw Remus swallow and look away. His own smile faded.
My whole family have been in Slytherin,
he said. And he would be too, it was expected, regardless of what he wanted.
Blimey! And I thought you seemed all right.
James said, without the slightest malicious inflection in his tone. Sirius found himself grinning and he could see Remus' mouth twitching. There was just something about James, something about his casual, friendly manner that was contagious.
Maybe I'll break the tradition. Where are you headed if you get the choice?
James lifted an invisible sword, and toppled off his seat, dead, his face suddenly 10 years older. Beside him lay Lily, unmoving, her green eyes staring without seeing. Remus turned to Sirius, hatred etched onto his pale, suddenly 21-year-old face.
It wasn't me!
Sirius shouted.
No, Moony, I wouldn't. I didn't kill them. I'm innocent, I swear.
Sirius Black's eyes snapped open and he sat up, panting.
I swear,
he whispered, fully awake now. A feeling of loss crept over him as it did whenever he thought of James and Lily. He doubted he'd ever get over their deaths, but he thought, in time, he could at least accept it if the Dementors would leave him alone, if they would stop reminding him of the emptiness that resided in the place where his heart had used to be. He got to his feet, ignoring the wasted feelings in his arms and legs. He tried to exercise as much as possible. When he wasn't sleeping, he was pacing. His cell was 7 strides from one wall to the other, and he knew every dull, gray brick, every rust spot on his iron-barred doors, and every speck of dirt or dust that covered the ground. Innocent, he muttered as he walked. The woman in the cell opposite his cackled, pressing her gaunt face up against her cell bars. Sirius paused to give her a pitying look. She had only been there a month and was already insane, and then turned and strode back the other way. On the 7th trip up his cell, he paused to pick up his sharp rock and used it to etch another small line into the wall behind him. There were 2,651, now 52, marks on the wall. The human guards thought he was mad. After all, he had been imprisoned exactly 2,650 days, and though they had tried, they hadn't yet been successful in figuring out what the extra 2 marks represented. If they'd asked, Sirius would have told them the marks were a record of the number of days that he and James and Lily had been apart, but they hadn't asked, and Sirius had been left to dwell on his memorial to the 2 best people he had ever known in solitude.
Or at least a semblance of solitude,
he muttered as the woman in the cell opposite his squealed and swatted at an invisible insect. Real insects tended to stay clear of Azkaban. Her shouting got louder as she smacked her arms. Presumably the insects were landing on her, and then began to scratch herself. Her arms, her legs, even her cheeks were red and raw by the time she came to her senses. She pressed her palm to her shin and it came away red. She screamed. Sirius shuddered and forced himself to keep pacing, though it did little to block out the noise. Her shrieking was getting other prisoners worked up. Aside from the guards, the lack of warmth and the fact that he shouldn't be there in the first place. The inconsistency was one of the things Sirius hated most about Azkaban. One moment, things were quiet, the next, what seemed like every prisoner on the island was screeching or talking to themselves. Sirius covered his ears, stone, and not much else made for one hell of an echo, but he was still able to sense footsteps.
Found her!
A dark-skinned guard called, skidding to a halt with his back to Sirius' cell.
Merlin, would you look at the mess she's made?
His partner arrived a moment later and pocketed his wand, staring at the bleeding woman. He ran a hand through his straw-colored hair.
Doesn't Parkinson usually give her a potion or something?
The first guard swore.
He does. It's on my desk in the guardroom. Reckon we need it. Nah. She's mad anyway.
Both guards stared at the woman.
Godric, they creep me out. I'm terribly sorry. We prisoners do try to be as aesthetically pleasing as possible,
Sirius said dryly. His voice cracked from lack of use, but he still thought he sounded witty enough. Both guards jumped.
Don't get smart with me, Black,
the blonde one said, jabbing a finger in Sirius' direction.
Wouldn't dream of it.
Sirius began to pace again.
Mental, the lot of them,
the other muttered.
Stop your pacing, Black. You're getting everyone worked up.
Sirius snorted as he walked.
It's not me. It's her.
He nodded toward the bleeding woman who was now rocking back and forward.
The prisoners can smell the blood. Good Godric, I hate this place,
the blonde said with a shudder.
Me too,
Sirius muttered.
That's enough out of you,
the blonde guard snapped.
Get a Dementor, would you, Jordan? I think Black's forgotten his place.
Sirius retreated to the back corner of his cell as one of the guards disappeared.
Not so brave now, are you?
Sirius glared at him.
I happen to like my soul where it is. Well, aren't you a funny one,
said the guard, who Sirius hated more and more with each passing second.
Not as funny as I used to be,
Sirius croaked, tracing one of the lines on his wall with a wasted finger.
That's all,
said the other guard, who had returned with a Dementor behind him.
Black.
The hooded figure glided forward, wrapping one of its skeletal hands around the iron bars of Sirius' cell. Sirius shivered, reaching for his threadbare blanket. Flashes of that night, the night his world ended, danced before his eyes. James, glasses askew, and face forever frozen in shock, Lily, pale and still, with tears not yet dry on her cheeks, Harry, crying, his little face stained with blood, Hagrid, sobbing as he patted Sirius' shoulder and took away the first of the only two people Sirius had left, and though he had never seen it, Remus, sobbing in an office that resembled Dumbledore's when he heard what had happened. And then his memory fogged over, leaving him with that familiar empty feeling and making him wonder if they were ever real at all. If they had ever existed, or if they had just been a dream.
Innocent?
He whispered.
I'm innocent.
You killed them.
No. No.
He focused on Peter's face, the one face that would never fade from his memory, and with Peter came everything else, Lily and James, who was holding Harry, surrounded by tendrils of pale silvery magic as Peter's shrill voice promised to keep them safe, that sick feeling he had had as he left Remus' house to check on Peter, the little smile on Peter's face as he blew up the street and the panic he had felt when he almost hadn't got his shield charm up in time.
I'm innocent,
he growled. He opened his eyes and sat up, unable to recall closing them, or lying down. The guards were still there, watching him through the bars with identical, revolted expressions. The Dementor, though, appeared to have lost interest in him and floated toward the woman's cell. Her whimpers ceased and she crawled forward, reaching out to it with red-stained hands. Sirius felt the temperature drop and knew what was going to happen before it did. He looked away, swallowing bile as the Dementor drew in a rattling breath. The guards yelled out and spun, but they weren't quick enough. The woman collapsed to the floor of her cell, a blank expression on her face.
"Get back to your post,"
the blonde guard snarled, giving the Dementor a vicious prod with his wand. The darker guard, who was retching a little ways down, shivered as it glided past and, once he could stand upright again, fished around in his pocket and produced a chocolate frog. Sirius stared with longing as the guard stuffed it into his mouth.
"This never would have happened if Parkinson was here," he said, wiping his mouth.
The smell clinging to his robes made Sirius wrinkle his nose.
"So you're saying this is my fault? You did forget her potion."
The other guard let loose with a string of swear words and then unlocked the woman's cell.
"Put her on her bed,"
he told his comrade.
"I don't think anyone deserves this,"
the darker guard said shakily, hoisting the woman into a sitting position.
"I don't think I deserve the paperwork that's going to come from this,"
the other said angrily. Sirius was dying to hit him. A woman had been kissed and the bastard was worried about paperwork.
"So where is Parkinson today? I heard he was having one of the Malfoy brats over for lunch. Lucky bastard." "Lucky? Those little beasts are a handful." "No, not that. I pity any bloke who has to make small talk with Lucius Malfoy's spawn. I just meant he's lucky 'cause he gets off work."
The woman keeled over with a quiet moan.
"Bloody buggering, help me, would you?"
The two guards grabbed an arm each and lifted the woman over to her poor excuse for a bed. It was a pile of ragged blankets and a moldy pillow.
"I don't reckon it's worth it, Parkinson getting off work, I mean,"
said the blonde guard as he wiped his hands on his robes.
"Which kid's he entertaining?"
Sirius found himself listening raptly. He didn't get news about the outside world very often. He could probably count on one hand the number of conversations he had overheard in Azkaban, and so far, this was most interesting since he had heard about Alice and Frank, because he actually knew who they were talking about. His cousin Narcissa had married the Malfoy heir and it seemed Lucius was just as big a get now as he had been 2,657 days or so ago, when Sirius had last seen him.
"The older one. Hyde or something."
The name stirred something in Sirius' memory. He had a vague recollection of a Daily Prophet report about a year before Harry was born, about his cousin almost miscarrying her firstborn son.
"Ah, yes. Lucius Malfoy's miracle child. The other boy who lived." "No, he should be the boy who lived,"
said the dark-haired guard.
"Potter came after." "Potter?"
Sirius asked, perking up at the familiar name. The guards gave him smug looks as they exited the cell opposite his.
"The boy who destroyed your master, Black. Didn't you ever hear what happened?" "Of course I heard,"
Sirius said, retreating back into his corner.
"I just didn't realize he had such a ridiculous nickname. Boy who lived. James and I used to call him Dark Lord's Downfall."
Sirius shut his mouth then, before he could let anything about the prophecy slip.
"You've got some nerve,"
the blonde guard spat.
"Talking about them."
Sirius wiped spittle off his cheek and turned to face the wall, tracing the lines again. Godric, he missed them. The guard laughed.
"That shut him up." "He has a point, though,"
the second guard said.
"Maybe someone should give Potter a new nickname." Why? "'Cause now there'll be 2 boys who lived at Hogwarts, in the same year, no less."
The other laughed.
"A Potter and 2 Malfoys. And there'll probably be a Weasley or 2. The school isn't going to know what hit them."
They both laughed at the joke, which really wasn't that funny in Sirius' opinion, and then the darker guard spoke up.
"Come on. If we've got any hope of getting home at a decent hour, we had better start on that damned paperwork."
The blonde guard slumped, following his companion out of Sirius' line of sight. Sirius slept fretfully that night. If he slept at all, it was often hard to tell in Azkaban. He dreamed that a boy who looked just as James had at 11, messy hair and all, came to stand outside his cell while he slept. In the dream, Sirius woke and the boy looked at him with disappointed eyes, which were flickering between James' hazel and Lily's green, as he ran a finger over the bars of the cell.
"You failed me,"
he said, scratching at a piece of rust.
"No,"
Sirius said. "Damn those bloody guards for talking about James and Harry."
"No, please."
"Failed?" The boy, who could have been James or his godson, and frankly, Sirius didn't know which scared him more, repeated. And then, he turned and walked away. Sirius didn't think, he leapt to his feet, determined to follow, no matter the cost. He transformed into Padfoot and stuck his head through the bars of his cell. The boy vanished around a corner. He whined and wriggled his body through the bars. Wait! He thought as orange flakes of rust were prized off the bars and fluttered to the ground like snow or embedded themselves in his shaggy fur. He changed back on the outside and looked around for the boy. "Wait!" he shouted again.
"It's too late for that,"
he heard.
"No, damn you! Wait!"
Sirius shouted. He forced his wasted muscles to move, and after his 8th step, a small part of his mind noted, even if he was dreaming, it was the furthest he had walked in a straight line in 7 years.
"Failed." "Wait!"
Sirius woke up with a yell. He was standing waist-deep in cold, salty water.
"What the hell?"
He stared at his sopping clothes and, after employing more of his favorite swear words, clambered back onto the rocky ground where he collapsed, shivering. "All right," he told his racing mind. "All right, so I had a dream, where I broke out of my cell as a dog and then I wake up and I'm out and just about ready to swim back to shore. Either I'm free, or I've lost my mind." He found himself leaning toward the latter, but that didn't explain why his thoughts were clearer than they had been in years or why he was wet. "So I'm free then?"
"How the bloody hell did that happen?"
he asked the overcast sky. It disdained to answer. Sirius scowled and then decided he didn't care. What mattered was that he was free. And that he wasn't going back to his cell. Ever. Partially because he doubted he'd be able to find it again, and partially because he didn't want to find it again. "I need to get off the island somehow." "Wand," was his next coherent thought. "Before I can do anything, I need a wand. My wand." And he knew how to get it. One of the most strictly enforced wizarding laws stated that a wand, being an incredibly powerful and, at times, volatile, magical object, once in the custody of an aura or hit wizard, could not be destroyed without a court order. Another curious fact about this particular law was that it was not public knowledge. Only those who had been trained in either wizarding law or wizarding law enforcement were supposed to know, because it was such an effective threat. When Sirius graduated from Hogwarts, he and James had joined the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, where they studied for a year and a half to become aurors. Usually, it took 3 years to get through the rigorous aura training program, but with help from Mad-Eye, a lot of sleepless nights and the fact that the wizarding world was at war and the Ministry needed everyone available to be fighting, Sirius, along with James, had been able to do it in half the time. Because of this training, it just so happened that Sirius knew of the laws regarding wand snapping, and because of an arsehole named Bartemius Crouch, it just so happened that Sirius filled the requirements. He had been denied any form of trial and whisked off to Azkaban by the next available port key, which meant his wand should have been filed away in the prison guardroom with the short-term prisoner's belongings. Without conscious thought, he suspected it was very much a survival instinct by this point. Sirius transformed. A few minutes later, at the entrance to Azkaban's guardroom, a huge, black, bear-like dog that was thin to the point of emaciation, slipped past a pair of Dementors. Another 10 minutes saw Sirius back down on the rocky beach, pocketing a thin wooden stick and a small mirror that he had had in his pocket when he was arrested. He had already tried to call James with it and he had seen a glimpse of James' smiling face before it became too much and he ended the connection. He hadn't bothered trying to apparate, there would likely be wards against it, and even if there weren't, his mind wasn't focused enough for him to do it without splinching himself. "Looks like I'm swimming after all," he thought grimly as he transformed back into Padfoot. It really wasn't that far. He could see land from where he was, but the water was rough and there was so much of it, and it was so open. He shook himself. 7 years. 7 years, he had spent, locked up for a crime he hadn't committed. In fact, he had probably done enough time in prison to compensate for every bad thing he had ever done, thought about doing, or would do in the future. While he wouldn't have ever broken out on his own, there was no way he'd willingly go back to life in that hellhole when freedom was so close. There hadn't been much point in him escaping before now, or even trying to. Peter was probably cowering under a rock somewhere where Sirius would never find him, or he would be as soon as he heard that he had broken out. Harry, who Hagrid had said was going to Lily's sister Petunia, was probably counting down the years he had left until he could go to Hogwarts, and Remus. Since he hadn't visited or made any attempts to contact Sirius, probably didn't know that Peter was the traitor and, Sirius guessed, would have spent the last 7 years mourning Lily, James, and the rat and dwelling on his hatred for Sirius. "I'll have to find them," Sirius thought. "Harry, to see if he's happy, Peter, to prove I'm innocent, and once I've done that I can find Moony, to explain everything, to apologize. And that's not going to happen if I don't get my arse off this bloody rock." Sirius took a deep breath and waded out into the murky water.
"Mrs. Peterson." "What, Dudley? Harry's copying my worksheet?"
Mrs. Patricia Peterson had been a teacher at St. Gregory's Primary School for 17 years. Since 11 of these years had been spent in the same classroom teaching Year 4 children, it was safe to say Mrs. Peterson had seen her fair share of 8- and 9-year-olds. She had thought herself well equipped to deal with any child. And then she had met Harry Potter.
"Potter, are you copying your cousin's worksheet?" "No, Mrs. Peterson," the boy said quietly. "Don't lie," Dudley told his cousin. Says you,
Potter muttered. Mrs. Peterson couldn't for the life of her remember when she had started addressing the boy as Potter instead of Harry. She supposed she had picked it up from the rest of the class and, since it didn't seem to make a difference to the boy, she hadn't bothered to correct herself.
Mrs. Peterson,
Dudley wailed, scrunching up his round face.
That's enough.
Mrs. Peterson gave Linda back her worksheet and walked over to the boy's desk.
Dudley, you don't need to keep shouting at me because I was already listening and, Potter, I've told you I won't tolerate lying in my classroom.
Some of the other students sniggered as Potter flushed.
I'm not lying, Mrs. Peterson,
he said, staring up at her with those big, bespectacled green eyes. How a child could look so pitiful while being such a monster was beyond her, but somehow, Potter pulled it off. He was unnaturally polite, which she didn't buy for a moment. The boy was probably trying to win her over as he had won Mrs. Badams last year.
Worksheet,
she said briskly, holding out her hand. He passed it over without a word. She checked it, noting the lack of working out, and passed it back.
Detention today at lunch, she said.
Dudley sniggered. Potter, if it was possible, looked relieved and nodded.
Dudley, worksheet,
she said. He passed it to her and found the answers the same as the Potter boys had been, also with no working out.
Excellent work as usual. Yes, Katrina.
She saw Potter's hand tighten around his pencil as she walked away. She gave them 5 more minutes to work on their maths problems.
You can do the rest for homework,
she told the class.
Now, who's going to write the best story?
Everyone looked at Katrina, who blushed and ducked her pigtailed head.
You have 1 hour to write and the topic is wishes. Get started.
She retreated to her desk as pencils started scratching on desktops. Mrs. Peterson watched her class with a warm smile. Felicity would no doubt write something about horses, Malcolm was fond of stories about football stars, while Linda liked dancers and Hannah liked cats. She was almost excited to read their stories. Under her careful eye, the quality of her students' writing had improved significantly, and the absence of bothersome spelling and grammatical errors made reading their work almost enjoyable. Mrs. Peterson watched them all for a moment longer, smiling at the way Gordon pulled a face every time he had to erase something and the way Hannah sighed and rubbed graphite off her left hand every so often, before she pulled her copy of Oliver Twist out of her desk drawer. It was one of her favorite books, though, as a teacher, it broke her heart to see Oliver, even if he was just a character, living in such horrible conditions, little food, no family, and forced into what could only be described as slavery. It made her cry every time.
Mrs. Peterson. Oh, yes, Gordon. It's past an hour,
the boy said, sucking on the end of his pencil. She became aware that most of the class had put their pencils down and were watching her. Potter, at the back of the classroom, was the only one not looking in her direction. He was reading his story with a funny expression she couldn't quite place.
So it has,
she said, marking the page.
I expect good things from these,
she said as she collected them,
since I gave you an extra 15 minutes. Thank you, dear. If you've given me your story, you can go to lunch.
With a collective whoop, her class charged out, leaving Potter sitting in his chair.
Story,
she said, holding out an impatient hand.
What would you like me to do?
He asked.
Lines today,
she said with a sigh as she straightened the pile of stories.
I will not copy other people's work. 20 times should do it, and then you can go to lunch. Yes, Mrs. Peterson,
Potter said, tearing a sheet of paper out of his workbook. Odd that he never argues. I suppose he knows it wouldn't work, or perhaps he knows he deserves it. She sat back down at her desk and pulled Potter's story towards her. Once, there was a boy called James, Potter had written. James lives with his mum and dad. Every morning James wakes up in his bedroom and goes to the kitchen where his mum gives him breakfast. His dad drives him to school, and after school his mum and dad take him to the park. After they get home from the park, they help James with his homework. Every night, James' mum makes dinner and it tastes good. Sometimes James helps because he wants to, not because he has to. They all eat at the table together, and sometimes James has second helpings. At night, they tell stories and they tuck James into his bed and tell him they love him. James tells them he loves them back and then he goes to sleep. If he has a bad dream, he gets to tell them about it and sleep in their bed until he feels better. James doesn't need to wish for anything, because he already has everything.
Potter. Yes, Mrs. Peterson.
Potter put his pencil down and looked up.
You don't need to call me Mrs. Peterson every time we talk,
she said irritably.
We've discussed this. Sorry, Mrs. Peterson, I mean, sorry. Apology accepted. Come over here, please. I'd like to talk to you about your story. My story? Yes, now, aside from the fact that I gave you an hour and you've barely written a paragraph, you haven't stuck to the topic. What did I say you had to write about? Wishes, Mrs. Peterson.
So he had been listening.
Yes, and what did you write about? Wishes coming true. No, Potter, you didn't.
Potter opened his mouth to say something and then closed it again.
You wrote about things that happen every day, when I wanted you to write about something you wish could happen.
Potter had the audacity to look confused.
Things that don't happen all the time,
she said, trying to get him to understand. Potter frowned.
But I don't get to spend time with my parents. Why not?
She knew the boy lived with his aunt and uncle but had always thought it was because his parents were incapable of looking after him. Mrs. Peterson had heard a rumor that the father was a drunk and the mother unfaithful, a woman who wouldn't know what real love looked like if it invited itself to tea. It would certainly explain why Potter had turned out the way he had.
They're dead.
She felt a twinge of pity for the boy she didn't particularly like.
Is that what you meant?
He nodded.
Well, I suppose that counts, but the rest of the story is just about your life with your aunt and uncle. That's not very creative. You think it's just like my life with...
Potter seemed to realize he was talking out loud and stopped.
Right.
He said stiffly, his jaw clenched.
Should I write it again? No, no.
Mrs. Peterson swallowed, the phrase "if looks could kill" running through her head as Potter glared and then walked stiffly back to his desk and sat down.
No. Another 10 lines will do. I will follow instructions.
Potter picked up his pencil, which snapped in his hand. He looked up and jumped about a foot out of his seat, eyes wide.
What are you looking at, Potter? And nothing,
he said, not looking at her. He picked up one of his pencil halves and started to write, though he sneaked furtive glances in her direction when he thought she wasn't looking. Mrs. Peterson was midway through Pierre's story about pirates when there was a knock on the classroom door.
Come in,
she said without looking up. She scribbled a comment on the story. Piers was a wonderfully imaginative boy, but he did tend to write about fighting quite a lot, and pulled another piece of work over.
Hello, Patricia, do you still have my poetry antholo? Hello, Sue, no, I don't,
Mrs. Peterson said, looking up from Emma's story about becoming a princess.
Anne had it. Why are you staring? Blue,
Sue said faintly.
Why is your hair blue? My hair.
Sue nodded. A horrible suspicion formed in Mrs. Peterson's mind.
Potter!
She screeched.
What did you do?
Potter paled, staring at her with wide green eyes, but he didn't answer.
I'll have to write home about this,
she told him as Sue slipped out of the classroom, looking as if she was trying not to laugh.
Now, what did you do to my wig? I didn't.
Potter stammered.
I didn't touch your wig, I swear.
But he didn't look sure of that. In fact, he looked a little worried. You did it, you little monster, I know you did, she thought viciously.
I'm sending you home. You're to give this report to your aunt and I'll be calling tonight to make sure you do.
Potter's expression was horrified. She pulled a pen out of her tin and wrote, Dear Mrs. Dursley. I don't know how or why it happened, but your nephew has somehow managed to turn my wig blue. I have suspended him from this afternoon's lessons as punishment. He will need to catch up in his own time. I trust you to take any extra disciplinary action you deem necessary. Yours sincerely, Patricia Peterson. She folded the paper in half and stuffed it into an envelope which she addressed to Mrs. Dursley.
Here,
she said, thrusting it at the now terrified Potter.
Take that home for your aunt to read. Yes, Mrs. Peterson,
he stammered, placing the envelope into his school bag.
And remember, I'll be calling tonight to follow it up.
Potter nodded and fled. Mrs. Peterson had no way of knowing it would be the last time he ever passed under her classroom doorway. End of chapter. Chapter 2, Escape from Privet Drive.
Ow! Dudley, stop!
Cried the smaller of the boys who were tussling on the grass under a large tree. The blonde woman with them glanced up at the sound, shifted on the park bench and slowly lowered her pale eyes back to the magazine she was reading. The bigger boy, Dudley, tightened his grip on a chunk of his cousin's messy, black hair and gave him shake for good measure.
Make me,
he sang, a grin spreading across his pink face. Harry glanced up at his aunt, who was pointedly ignoring them, and then back at his tormentor. He sighed and pinched Dudley's fat arm. His cousin howled and let go while Harry rolled away and sprang to his feet, ready to,
What did you do?
His Aunt Petunia demanded, hurrying over.
He hurt me.
Dudley wailed, scrunching up his face. Aunt Petunia inspected the little red mark on his arm, kissed it better and rounded on her nephew.
He pulled my hair,
Harry said defensively.
Perhaps if it wasn't so long, he wouldn't have been able to,
she snapped. She grabbed a handful in her bony fingers and gave a tug, rather harder than her son had. Tears, real ones, not fake ones like Dudley's, sprang up in Harry's eyes.
It needs a cut. Tonight, I'll. Mum.
Dudley sobbed.
I know, Popkin,
she said, adopting a kinder tone the minute she stopped talking to Harry.
Here, up we get.
Dudley reached up to her, obviously wanting to be carried. Aunt Petunia took her son's hand instead. She had long since stopped carrying him, claiming he was too old for that. Harry suspected it had more to do with his cousin's size, and that if Dudley wasn't so fat, his aunt would still carry him everywhere.
"Don't come back until you've thought about what you've done,"
she called without turning. Dudley looked over his shoulder as the pair of them left the playground and gave Harry a smug look.
"Yes, Aunt Petunia,"
Harry muttered, kicking the grass. He swiped his tears away, made his way over to the swings and sat down, one hand wrapping around the chain, his feet making holes in the bark chips. He already knew what he had done wrong. He had hurt Dudley, but there was no way he was going back to number 4 for quite some time. He knew from past experience that, the moment he got home, he'd be locked in his cupboard for the night, and being bored at a playground was better than being bored at home.
"Excuse me?"
Harry looked up, startled, to see a tall man. Yes, it was definitely a man, even if he was wearing a dress, with shaggy, shoulder-length black hair standing next to him. The man's grey eyes were distant and intense all at once and vaguely familiar, but Harry didn't know where from.
"Is that seat taken?"
the man asked quietly, pointing to the other swing. His voice was friendly, but scratchy as if he hadn't used it in a while. It matched the man's gaunt appearance.
"No,"
Harry said.
"You can sit down if you like,"
he added, when the man made no move to do so. He was just staring at Harry, looking happy and sad at the same time.
"Thank you,"
the man said, sitting. Harry nodded and went back to staring at his trainers.
"My name's Padfoot."
Harry said, frowning slightly as he looked up.
"Do I know you from somewhere?"
he heard himself ask.
"Maybe,"
the man, Padfoot, said nonchalantly.
"I've been on the news recently."
"Oh," Harry said. He had heard that tone before. Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon used it when people came to the house. It meant he wasn't lying, but that he was leaving something out.
"What for?"
Padfoot was quiet for a long time.
"I broke out of prison,"
he admitted, with a sheepish smile. Harry's eyes widened. He leapt off the swing, backing away from the strange man with the strange name and his strange clothes. Harry's eyes flicked toward the general area of his house. He was fast thanks to years of practice at running away from Dudley, but he didn't think he would be able to get there before Padfoot caught him.
"I'm not going to hurt you, Harry,"
Padfoot said, patting the swing. Harry watched him warily.
"I promise,"
Padfoot said, smiling as he patted the seat again.
"I just want to talk."
Harry sat, unable to help but feel a little suspicious.
"Why? You seem like a nice kid. Maybe we can be friends."
"Friends?" Harry asked, his eyebrows shooting up. He had never had a friend before. Dudley had made sure of that.
"But you, prison?"
He was a little tempted to befriend the man, purely to see the look on his aunt's face as he brought this criminal and his strange, dirty clothes home. Padfoot sighed.
"Have you ever been in trouble for doing something you didn't do?"
Harry nodded slowly. That happened to him all the time. Once, he had been running away from Dudley and his gang and ended up on the roof of the school kitchens. He had no idea how it had happened. All he could think was that when he had jumped to hide behind the big rubbish bins, the wind had caught him. And, only last week he had had to take that school report home to inform the Dursleys about the incident with Mrs. Peterson's wig. Today was the first day since then that he had been let out of his cupboard.
"It was like that. Did it help that you told them you didn't?"
"If they were anything like the Dursleys, it wouldn't have."
"I didn't have a chance,"
Padfoot said, fiddling with his frayed sleeve.
"No one listened because they were so bloody, angry,"
he amended with a quick glance at Harry, who smirked.
"And they wouldn't have believed me anyway." "I believe you,"
Harry offered. Padfoot didn't seem like the sort of person who deserved to be locked up.
"Thanks, kid,"
Padfoot said, smiling. Harry nodded.
So, what about you? Ever broken out of prison?
Harry laughed and shook his head. His cupboard was more or less a prison, but he wasn't meant to talk about it.
What do you like to do, then?
Harry said.
Well, I cook a lot.
He didn't particularly enjoy cooking, at least not for the Dursleys, but he'd rather cook than weed the garden or help Dudley tidy his spare bedroom.
Do you read?
Padfoot asked.
Play any sports?
Harry hesitated. He was always picked last in team games. Just last week, Ben Forster, who had a broken arm, had been chosen before him, and he was always the first one out in games like dodgeball, not due to lack of skill, but because Dudley and his gang always targeted him first, even if they were on the same side.
I suppose I like sports, but I don't get to play very often, and Dudley doesn't read, so we don't have many books. Why don't they buy you your own books?
Padfoot asked slowly. Harry shrugged. Padfoot stared at him.
Your clothes,
he said finally, running a hand over his chin.
Were they Dudley's?
Harry nodded, plucking a loose strand off his too big jumper.
Do you have anything that's yours? There's nothing wrong with hand-me-downs,
he said, dutifully repeating Aunt Petunia's words. He started to kick the bark ships again.
Never said there was,
Padfoot said quickly. He was quiet for a bit and then asked,
if you could have one thing, anything, what would it be?
Harry, who had never been asked such a question before, wasn't quite sure what to say. He took a moment to think about his answer and then said,
my parents.
He didn't really mind that he was talking to a complete stranger. Padfoot watched him sadly.
They died in a car crash when I was a baby. See, car crash.
Padfoot choked.
A car crash. Yeah,
Harry said.
I don't remember it, but that's where I got my scar.
He brushed his fringe aside, but Padfoot didn't look, which was odd. Most people Harry met seemed fascinated by it, even if he didn't show it first. Harry felt himself liking Padfoot more by the moment. He, aside from Mrs. Figg, was the only person who didn't treat him like dirt, or, alternatively, with awe, neither of which Harry particularly liked.
Car crash,
Padfoot said again, louder this time. Harry couldn't quite place his tone, but at a guess, he would have said he was shocked and maybe even angry.
They told you it was a car crash?
Harry nodded apprehensively. He had spent enough time around his cousin and uncle to recognize a tantrum brewing. Padfoot stood suddenly.
Are you coming?
He asked, already striding across the grass. Harry got up and followed after a moment's hesitation. He had expected yelling, what for he didn't quite know, and he didn't quite know what to make of this calm fury.
Where are we going? Your house,
Padfoot said briskly.
My house,
Harry repeated, just to make sure he had heard right. Padfoot didn't answer. He was muttering about something called Dumbledore and stupid muggles, neither of which made any sense to Harry. He walked without talking all the way down Magnolia Road, Harry jogging to keep up, then hesitated on the corner of Magnolia Crescent.
Which way now?
He asked.
I'm not supposed to bring strangers home,
Harry said.
I know your aunt,
Padfoot said impatiently.
Petunia, isn't it? Tall, skinny woman. Married to Vernon, a fat bloke with no neck and an ugly mustache. That's them,
Harry said, trying not to laugh. He led Padfoot, who was still muttering about car crashes, down Magnolia Crescent, through the side alley onto Wisteria Walk and then onto Privet Drive. At this point Padfoot seemed to recognize the street and led Harry all the way to number 4's driveway. He paused by the door and then, with an oddly triumphant look, jabbed the doorbell.
James didn't even own a damn car.
He growled as they waited.
James,
Harry said.
Wait, did you know my... Took you long enough?
He heard Aunt Petunia say as the locks on the door clicked.
Go apologize to Diddy and then you can go and stir they, oh.
She said, as she opened the door and saw Padfoot. Her pale eyes narrowed as they drifted over his unusual clothes, and then up to his face. Aunt Petunia never forgot a face.
What did you do?
She hissed, spotting Harry who froze in the driveway.
Harry
stammered.
A car crash.
Padfoot said softly. Aunt Petunia paled.
You told him that Lily and James died in a car crash. Get inside,
she snapped, jabbing a bony finger at Harry.
Go to your room,
she said, her eyes flicking to Padfoot.
That Dumbledore man promised your kind would leave us alone. You aren't welcome here.
Harry, who was walking very slowly toward the door, trying to hear as much as possible, wondered who or what Padfoot's kind was.
I'm not welcome in a lot of places at the moment,
Padfoot said, folding his arms.
Inside.
Aunt Petunia snapped at Harry, who had just bent to tie his shoelace to buy himself more time to listen.
They didn't even own a car.
Padfoot said, throwing his arms up in the air.
I'll call the police,
she told him.
Try,
Padfoot said, twirling a long wooden stick, which he had pulled from somewhere in his clothes, between his long fingers.
Put that away,
Aunt Petunia said, her voice shaking ever so slightly.
I don't want any of that here. Any of what?
Harry asked.
I said inside.
She shrieked. Mrs. Ferry from number 7 across the street looked up. Harry scampered into the house, ducking the swipe she aimed at his ear.
You too?
Aunt Petunia said to Padfoot.
I'm not discussing this out here.
Harry darted down the hallway and into his cupboard. He closed the door most of the way but left a small crack which he pressed his ear to.
And make sure you wipe your shoes on the mat. You're filthy. A car crash.
Harry heard Padfoot say loudly as soon as the front door clicked shut.
Keep your voice down,
Aunt Petunia snapped.
Yes, we told the boy it was a car crash. What else were we supposed to say? That a lunatic blew them up.
Harry's hand moved up to trace the lightning bolt scar on his forehead. Blew them up?
That's exactly what you should have told him. He has a right to know why he's living here, a right to know why his parents are dead. They died to save him and you told him it was an accident.
Harry took a deep breath and realized with a jolt he had stopped breathing.
We didn't have a choice,
Aunt Petunia said frostily.
We want him normal, like Dudley.
There was no doubt who she was talking about.
Telling him stories like that would make him wonder why they were killed and we don't like questions. He'd push us and we'd have to tell him the whole freaky story, about my unnatural sister, the Snape boy and that wretched Potter. And what's wrong with that?
Padfoot demanded.
I'm not having any of that in this house,
Aunt Petunia said shrilly.
When we took him in, we swore to put a stop to all of that freakish nonsense. Telling him things like that would encourage unnatural behavior and... What about when he goes to Hogwarts?
Padfoot asked.
Everyone knows his story, everyone but him, apparently. That doesn't matter. He's not going. Not going.
Padfoot shouted, sounding angry again.
What in the name of Merlin's toenails do you mean he's not bloody going? I won't have one in the house,
Aunt Petunia said, with an air of finality.
You can't just decide that. You can't just ignore it and hope it'll all go away. It seems to be working well so far,
Aunt Petunia snapped.
And I'll thank you not to tell me how to raise my own nephew.
Padfoot's reply was lost in the sound of the front door flinging open.
Evening, Petunia Dea,
Harry heard his uncle say.
Who's this? I'm a friend of Lily's,
Padfoot said before Aunt Petunia could say anything.
We've met before. You?
Uncle Vernon roared. Harry could tell, just from the volume of his voice, that his face was already purple.
You? Get out of my house. I've come to talk to you about Harry,
Padfoot said calmly.
Get out.
Uncle Vernon bellowed again.
Boy.
Harry jumped at being addressed, lost his footing and tripped out of his cupboard, landing sprawled in the hallway. He stared at the glossy black shoes in front of him and slowly looked up to see his uncle's purple face. I knew it, he thought dazedly.
What did you do? Nothing,
Harry said hastily, scrambling to his feet.
What did you tell him?
Uncle Vernon shouted, spraying Harry with spittle. His meaty hand grabbed Harry's baggy shirt and gave him a shake.
Enough!
Padfoot shouted. There was a bang and Uncle Vernon released Harry with a yell and stepped back, cradling his now very red fingers. Harry took a step back and straightened his glasses. Padfoot looked furious, but not, Harry didn't think, at him.
You and your wife.
He snarled at Uncle Vernon.
Out. I need to talk to Harry. This is my house.
Uncle Vernon shouted, his mustache quivering.
You can't tell me what to do. Oh, I think I can,
Padfoot growled, twirling his stick. Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon gave both Harry and Padfoot one last look of pure hatred and stalked down the hall and into the kitchen.
Are you all right?
Padfoot asked Harry, tucking the stick into a pocket of his dress.
I'm fine.
Padfoot didn't look convinced, but he didn't push the point.
How much did you hear?
He asked.
Something about a car crash, but not much else,
said Harry, not meeting Padfoot's grey stare.
I could always tell when James was lying, and you've inherited his face,
Padfoot said conversationally.
How much did you really hear? All of it,
Harry admitted sheepishly.
I thought so.
Padfoot sighed, running a hand through his dark hair.
This is not going the way I thought it would.
He muttered before letting out another sigh.
You planned this?
Harry asked doubtfully.
Planned? Nah, it wasn't, you were supposed to be happy.
He sighed.
You were supposed to be playing pranks on your aunt and uncle with your cousin. You were supposed to know all about your mum and dad. You were supposed to be excited, because you've only got 2.5 years until Hogwarts. Sorry,
Harry said quickly.
It's not your fault,
Padfoot said, looking shocked.
It's theirs.
He jabbed a finger in the direction of the kitchen, where Harry could hear his aunt and uncle arguing.
They want you to be normal. What a load of hippogriff dung. Hippo what? Hippogriff, never mind.
Padfoot began to mutter under his breath about James, Lily, Dursley, Dumbledore, and Aurors.
Mr. Padfoot.
Padfoot blinked and then laughed.
Just Padfoot, Harry. Did you really know my parents?
Padfoot looked down at Harry with a sad smile.
You look a lot like your dad, you know,
he said,
but you have your mum's eyes. Really?
Harry asked, hoarding this knowledge away. Padfoot nodded and pulled a small mirror out of his pocket.
James Potter,
he said softly and then turned it toward Harry. The mirror was clearly not a mirror. Harry decided it was a sort of pocket television, though he didn't know how that was possible, since every telly he had ever seen was bulky, because when he looked into it, he saw his father. James Potter was a handsome, messy-haired man with a long nose, bright hazel eyes and a happy, friendly smile. James waved and then turned to laugh at someone Harry couldn't see.
"Can I see my mum too?" "It doesn't work like that, kiddo,"
Padfoot said apologetically. Harry was a little disappointed, but he nodded. He had seen a few photographs of his mother when he helped Aunt Petunia clean out the attic, but she had been younger than he was in most of them.
"What were they like?" "Lily was... well, she was brilliant. Beautiful inside and out and probably the nicest person I've ever met, though she did have a bit of a temper. James was funny and brave. Stubborn too. Bit of a prat at times, but aren't we all? He was the best friend anyone could ever have." "Were you close?" "They were my family,"
Padfoot croaked. He cleared his throat loudly and was quiet for a moment. Harry waited patiently.
"Your dad and I were so close people thought we were brothers, and your mum and I had a rocky start, but she was like my sister by the end." "So are we related?"
Harry asked. Padfoot smiled.
"Second cousins, your great-grandparents are the same as mine, Cygnus and Violetta Black."
He swallowed, looking decidedly nervous.
"I'm also your godfather. They, your mum and dad, wanted me to look after you if anything ever happened to them. But then, well, I was arrested and Dumbledore brought you here. But now you're free,"
Harry said, wondering if Padfoot was saying what he thought he was saying.
"Not free,"
Padfoot said,
"but I am out of prison."
He stared at his feet for a long time and then looked up again, seeming agitated.
"Under normal circumstances, I'd never ask this. You're, what, 8.5? And I'm trying to evade Aurors and the rest of the ministry, but if you want another home..." "Another home?"
Harry asked, his voice climbing an octave.
"As in, away from the Dursleys?" "It's fine if you don't want to,"
Padfoot said quickly.
"I want to!"
Harry half shouted.
"Really?"
Padfoot asked, beaming. Harry nodded emphatically.
"Are you sure? I don't know what state the house is in yet, and it might be dangerous. Like I said, there are people after me." "I want to,"
Harry said, hardly believing what he was hearing. He had always dreamed that an unknown relative would come and take him away, and now, Padfoot, his dad's best friend, was offering to do just that.
"I have no idea what to do with a kid,"
Padfoot continued.
"Moony always said I'd make a terrible father." "You can't be any worse than the Dursleys,"
Harry said bluntly. Padfoot grinned a little ruefully.
"I guess not."
He paused, running a hand over his cheeks.
"Merlin, this visit is definitely not going the way I thought it would." "What?" "I was going to come and see you,"
Padfoot admitted.
"maybe get to know you a bit. And then I was going to go into hiding while I figured out how to make everyone else see that I'm innocent. After that I would have come back and made you the same offer as I am now." "I can help you prove you're innocent,"
Harry said.
"I appreciate the gesture, Harry,"
he said with a snort,
"but me adopting you is going to look pretty bad. Everyone will think I've kidnapped you for Voldemort." "Who?"
Padfoot sighed.
"I keep forgetting you don't know, but I don't have time to tell you now. I need to leave before someone sees me here and calls the DMLE." The what?
Harry asked.
Department of Magical Law Enforcement,
Padfoot said. He waved a hand to cut off Harry's exclamations of magic. And
you can't say that word here, Uncle Vernon hates it. If you're coming, you had better pack.
Harry pulled open the door of his cupboard.
Is that a bed?
Padfoot spluttered, peering in. Harry shrugged, grabbed his rucksack and started tossing clothes into it.
They make you sleep in here?
Harry shrugged again, stuffing a pair of Uncle Vernon's old socks into a pocket.
I'm ready,
he announced a moment later, hoisting his rucksack on. Padfoot was staring at the spider in the corner of the roof. He shook himself.
Here, let me,
he said, reaching for Harry's bag. Harry stared at him.
Here.
Padfoot said impatiently. Harry passed it over with a curious look at his godfather. Padfoot slung it over his shoulder and led Harry down the hall and into the kitchen. Dudley was playing with Glenn, his tortoise. The poor creature was currently being flown over Dudley's empty plate, accompanied by noises better suited to a rocket ship than a reptile. Aunt Petunia hadn't touched her food at all, but kept sipping at her glass of water, while Uncle Vernon, whose plate was empty, drummed his thick fingers on the table. All three of them looked up at Harry and Padfoot.
Leaving, are you?
Aunt Petunia said waspishly, her pale eyes darting over Padfoot.
Yes. About time,
Uncle Vernon grumbled.
I'm taking Harry with me. Taking the boy?
Aunt Petunia said, sounding puzzled.
Where? I'm going to live with him,
Harry said.
You can't. I'm his godfather,
Padfoot said indignantly.
If he wants to live with me, you can't stop him.
Aunt Petunia's lips thinned. Her chair scraped as she stood and left the room. Everyone watched her go. She returned about 30 seconds later with a pink tinge in her cheeks and a crumpled letter which she handed to Padfoot. She sat down again, studiously avoiding Uncle Vernon's eyes. Padfoot read the letter quickly and then passed it back.
I'm still taking him.
Dudley, who was craning his neck to try to read it, slipped off his seat. Harry turned his laugh into a cough and swore he saw his godfather's mouth twitch.
But the protection? He won't be safe.
Aunt Petunia said, looking at Harry.
I can take care of him,
Padfoot said, resting a hand on Harry's shoulder. Aunt Petunia pursed her lips as though she doubted this, but all she said was,
I suppose I'll need to call Mrs. Figg and tell her you won't be coming over tomorrow. We won't be sending you money,
Uncle Vernon said.
If you want the boy, you can pay for him. Money won't be a problem,
Padfoot assured them. He looked down at Harry.
Would you like a minute to say goodbye? Bye,
Harry told the Dursleys. Out of the corner of his eye he saw Padfoot press his lips together to keep from laughing.
So, wait. You're leaving?
Dudley said, picking himself up off the floor.
Yep,
Harry said. Dudley frowned and then stuck out his pink hand.
Bye, then.
Harry shook it, feeling rather silly.
Yeah, bye. Bye, Glenn.
He added for good measure as Aunt Petunia flung her arms around her son.
I think I'm going to be sick,
Padfoot muttered over Aunt Petunia's wailed praise for Dudley's manners.
All set, kid.
Harry grinned, nodding. The two of them left the kitchen, followed by Uncle Vernon, who was humming under his breath and looked as if he might break out in a jig at any moment. As they walked down the familiar hallway, Harry took one last glance at his cupboard and smiled slightly. Padfoot followed his gaze.
You sure this is everything?
He asked, tapping the strap of Harry's rucksack.
Pretty sure,
Harry said, grinning. He was leaving Privet Drive. It was actually happening. He cast a quick look at his uncle, who opened the front door, looking the happiest Harry had ever seen him. Harry followed Padfoot outside and turned, racking his brain for something to say. What did one say at the end of 7.5 years of mutual dislike? Thank you, maybe? Harry thought. But for what? No sooner than Harry opened his mouth to say bye again, Uncle Vernon snapped the door closed. Well, that makes things easier.
Git,
Padfoot muttered with a dark look at number 4.
Ah, well. Not our problem anymore.
Harry took one last look at number 4 before following Padfoot down his aunt's perfectly kept garden path.
Are you hungry or can you wait? I can wait,
Harry said, shrugging.
Excellent.
He sighed loudly.
I wasn't going to worry about it, but I've got you now. I think we'll have to go to Gringotts before we do anything. I'm just about out of money and security's going to get tighter once they realize I've got you. How to get there? Get where? London,
Padfoot said with a grin that lit up his thin face.
More specifically, Diagon Alley.
End of chapter. Chapter 3, Gringotts Wizarding Bank.
Die where? Diagon Alley,
Padfoot laughed.
It's where Gringotts is. Gringotts. The bank. Just wait up a moment.
Padfoot stopped and pulled his stick out of his pocket. He started talking to himself in another language, one that sounded made up in Harry's opinion, and then tapped his arm.
How did you do that?
Harry asked, astonished. Padfoot was now blonde with blue eyes and a rounder face than he had had before.
Hold still,
Padfoot said, tapping Harry's head.
What do I look like?
Harry asked excitedly. Padfoot waved his stick again and a mirror appeared. Harry took it, surveying his new face. His hair was as messy as ever, but it was a light brown color and his eyes were blue instead of green.
How did you do that?
Harry asked again.
Magic,
Padfoot said, twirling his stick.
Magic's not real,
Harry said automatically. But how else could he have done all those things? A little voice in his head argued.
Why not?
Padfoot asked reasonably.
Just because,
Harry finished lamely.
It's real,
Padfoot promised. Harry watched him, not quite convinced.
Can you show me more?
Padfoot thought for a moment, had a quick look around and then waved his stick.
Wingardium Leviosa.
Harry felt the ground vanish beneath his feet. He looked down and noticed, with a quiet shout of surprise, that he was floating. He was well above Padfoot's head, and when he kicked his feet all they touched was air.
Believe me yet?
Padfoot asked, grinning. Harry nodded, not sure he trusted himself to speak, and felt himself slowly being lowered to the ground.
Good, because I might have had to leave you there otherwise.
Harry laughed shakily.
So you're a what? Wizard.
Harry said quietly.
I am. And is that a wand?
He stared at the wooden stick with newfound respect.
It is. Can I try?
He blurted.
With my wand?
Padfoot thought for a moment and then shrugged.
Sure.
Harry accepted it gingerly, half expecting it to bite him.
What do I do? Try. Say Lumos.
Lumos, Harry said. There was a tiny white light at the tip of Padfoot's wand, so small he could hardly see it.
Is that what it's supposed to do? Usually it's bigger,
Padfoot said, shrugging,
but my wand's always been unpredictable for other people.
Lumos, Harry said again, giving it a wave. The wand tip lit up until it was almost blinding.
Nox,
Padfoot said, shielding his eyes.
Nox,
Harry said quickly. The wand extinguished, as did all the street lights within 30 feet of them. Harry pressed the wand back into Padfoot's hand.
You're going to be one hell of a wizard,
Padfoot said, shaking his head.
I'm not a wizard,
Harry said. Padfoot's lips twitched, as if he knew something Harry didn't.
I can't be. Really? You've never made anything strange happen before, done something you couldn't explain later?
Harry's eyes widened.
That's magic.
Padfoot grinned.
Probably. You can tell me all about it on the way to London. Stand back. How are we getting to London?
Harry asked as Padfoot stuck out his wand.
Do you have a magic car?
With a loud bang, a purple, triple-decker bus materialized. Harry stared at it with wide eyes.
Not quite,
Padfoot said casually.
2 please.
He said, passing a giant gold coin and 4 silver ones to the squat, neatly shaven man who had just emerged from the bus.
But,
Harry stammered, staring at the bus that had appeared from nowhere.
But... Later,
Padfoot promised.
Thank you, sir,
the man wheezed, pocketing Padfoot's strange money.
Welcome to the night business. I'm Jeremy Phillips and I'll be your conductor this evening. Where is it you gentlemen are headed? London. The Leaky Cauldron.
Padfoot said.
Come on, kid.
Harry stumbled onto the bus after his godfather, unable to help but smile a little. While the Dursleys had called him boy to avoid saying his name, Padfoot addressing him as kid was done with the same inflection as Harry and wasn't malicious at all. It was nice, Harry thought, to be addressed like a human being.
Have you got any luggage? Just this,
Padfoot said, shrugging a shoulder to show Harry's rucksack.
Any preference about seating? We won't be sleeping. Somewhere we can talk without interrupting other passengers would be brilliant. Follow me,
Jeremy said as the bus jerked. Harry would have fallen over if Padfoot hadn't caught him. They were led up a wobbly staircase to the top story of the bus, which had 4 poster beds fixed to the floor.
Take your pick,
Jeremy said.
I'll be downstairs if you need me, but otherwise, enjoy your trip and I'll let you know when we arrive at the Leaky Cauldron. Thank you,
Padfoot said, flopping onto the closest bed. Harry sat down on the one beside it. Jeremy descended the staircase with a little wave as the bus jerked again. It took off quickly, weaving through traffic that Harry was certain hadn't been on Privet Drive.
Is this safe?
He asked, his hands fisted into the bedspread.
It helps if you don't look out the windows,
Padfoot said. Harry, who had just yelped as the bus missed a pair of runners, was inclined to agree.
So, tell me about any magic you've used.
Padfoot was sitting up now, watching Harry with an expression of interest.
Okay, well,
Harry said.
Last week I think I turned my teacher's wig blue.
Harry wasn't sure how long they were actually aboard the bus for, but the time passed quickly, Harry told Padfoot about Mrs. Peterson, and since Padfoot seemed genuinely interested, he also told him about the time he had ended up on the kitchen roof.
"Do you remember how you got up there?"
Padfoot asked once he had stopped laughing. Harry shook his head.
"I thought it was the wind." "I reckon you apparated,"
Padfoot said thoughtfully. Harry made a face at the new word but didn't comment. He stored it away in the ask later compartment of his head.
"If you had levitated yourself, you would have realized what was happening, arg."
He flew off the bed and onto the floor with a thump as the bus stopped suddenly. Harry only avoided the same fate by grabbing hold of the bedpost.
"Leaky Cauldron, London!"
Jeremy shouted up the stairs.
"That's us,"
Padfoot said gingerly, pushing himself off the ground. Harry kept his expression carefully blank, not wanting to laugh. Padfoot noticed.
"Oh, go on,"
he said with a grin.
"It must have looked stupid." "No, it..." "Well, yeah,"
Harry admitted, trying and failing to choke back a laugh as he scooped his rucksack up.
"Thought so,"
Padfoot said with a grin as he led Harry down the narrow spiral staircase.
"Thanks,"
Harry said to Jeremy as they hopped of the bus and into the chilly February night.
"Have a good night."
The night bus vanished with a bang that made Harry jump backward.
"This way,"
Padfoot said, his mouth twitching.
"Just laugh,"
Harry said, falling into step beside him.
"You let me, before."
But Padfoot didn't. Instead, he smiled.
"You're so much like Lily."
Harry beamed. "I'm like my mum," he thought happily. "I look like Dad, but with Mum's eyes and personality." It was strange to be so excited about being compared to people that, before tonight, he had known nothing about. People were always telling Dudley he was like Uncle Vernon, and while Harry had always laughed, he'd hate to be compared with his uncle, he had always been a touch jealous too, that Dudley was like one of his parents.
"Where are you going, Harry?"
Padfoot asked. Harry spun and saw his godfather standing 10 paces back, struggling to keep a straight face.
"To Dragon Alley." "Diagon,"
Padfoot said, definitely laughing now.
"Come here."
Harry walked back and gave his godfather a sheepish smile before he was steered through the door of a dingy-looking pub. Inside smelled vaguely of smoke, and since it was almost dinner time, was full of noisy patrons.
"Welcome to the Leaky Cauldron,"
Padfoot muttered, keeping a hand on Harry's shoulder as they made their way through the masses of people.
"What is that?"
Harry whispered, staring at a short creature with a long nose, pointed ears, and sharp, black eyes.
"A goblin,"
Padfoot muttered.
Don't stare, they don't like, nope, he's seen us."
The goblin smiled to reveal pointed, white teeth and waved one long-fingered hand in their direction. Padfoot waved back, shuddering.
"They're scary and they know it,"
he told Harry as they wove through the crowd.
"Very professional though, goblins,"
he said.
"And lucky for us, too." "What do you mean?"
Padfoot thought for a minute.
"The less you know, Harry," he said quietly, "the safer you are. At least for now,"
he added when Harry's expression darkened.
"I've got a lot to explain to you, but now isn't the time." "Excuse me,"
he said gruffly. A woman muttered something and stepped aside. Padfoot guided Harry into a small, walled courtyard, empty save for a rubbish bin and a haughty-looking cat. Harry cast a dubious look around as Padfoot stepped forward.
"I can never remember the combination,"
he grumbled, prodding the wall with his wand.
"Combination." You need it to get into Diagon Alley. 3 up. 1 across or 2?
Padfoot muttered. He was quiet for a moment and then,
Oh, yes. Got it. Stand back, Harry.
He lifted his wand and then stopped. He turned back to Harry with a speculative look on his face.
Once we're in Diagon Alley, I need you to stay close, all right?
Harry nodded.
Keep calling me Padfoot. If you have to introduce yourself, don't mention your last name, I'll explain later.
He said with a grimace.
And, no matter what happens, do not let anyone see your scar.
Harry's hand moved up to trace the familiar shape on his forehead.
Other than that, we should be fine, hopefully. No one knows I've got you yet and we can be gone before they're any the wiser. And then you'll explain everything. Merada's honor,
Padfoot said with a wink. Harry's eyes narrowed.
Let me guess, later. Bright kid,
Padfoot remarked to no one in particular as he tapped his wand on the courtyard wall. With a rumble, a brick started to shake and wriggled out of place, leaving a hole. Even as Harry watched, the hole grew, and more bricks moved until he and Padfoot were standing in a huge archway. The pub was still behind him, he could still smell the pipe smoke and hear the chatter, but on the other side of the archway he could see a cobbled street winding every which way.
Welcome to Diagon Alley,
Padfoot said as they stepped through. Harry didn't know where to look first. Despite the time, there were still quite a few people massing outside shops and crowding around stalls. All of them were wearing dresses like Padfoot's, and quite a few had pointy hats. Aside from that, they didn't look all that different from any other person Harry had ever seen. They certainly didn't all have long beards or warty noses, though Harry did see one austere-looking woman with a bright red handbag who was clutching a toad. Behind Harry, Padfoot sighed.
It's nice to be back,
he murmured.
This way.
Harry followed a little reluctantly, keen to have a look around. He stayed close to his godfather. It would be all too easy to get lost in this, but his eyes wandered where his feet couldn't. He saw a spindly old man selling cauldrons, a pretty young witch selling protective amulets, and a red-haired boy a bit older than Harry was on what appeared to be a broomstick, being chased by his mother and another boy who looked exactly the same, who was laughing as he apologized to the people the boy on the broom had knocked over. After them came 2 other red-headed children, a boy, who looked about Harry's age, and a girl who was a bit younger, who knocked into Padfoot with a squeak.
Sorry,
said the boy as he and his sister ran past them.
Not a problem,
Padfoot said, his eyes fixed on the boy on the broomstick.
Is he flying?
Harry asked, staring after the family. The mother had caught up and was shouting at her son. Padfoot nodded and smiled a little wistfully.
That's something James and I would have done,
he said, staring at the sulky-looking twin.
Except it would have been Mooney chasing us, not James' mum. Mooney. One of your dad's old friends,
Padfoot said, starting to walk again. Harry didn't.
He's Harry.
Out of the corner of his eye, Harry saw Padfoot turn and walk back toward him. He was saying something Harry didn't hear. Harry was too busy looking at the stall selling newspapers. On the front page of every one was a picture of Padfoot, with dark hair like he had had when Harry had first met him. Below the headline, "Have you seen this wizard?" Harry didn't know whether to be more stunned by that, or by the fact that the picture was moving, like a miniature, soundless television.
Is that you?
Harry said through numb lips when Padfoot was close enough to hear him.
Yes. Harry. What did you do?
Harry asked, wondering what he could have possibly done to end up on the front page of the newspaper.
I'm innocent, remember,
Padfoot said. Harry nodded automatically.
It's a long story,
he said with a grimace, pushing his hair out of his face. Padfoot took a deep breath, looking pained.
I'll tell you now if you want me to. I don't like having to put this off any more than you do, but it'll make much more sense if you let me explain a few other things first, and I'd rather not do that here, for your sake.
Harry nodded slowly.
All right.
Padfoot sighed, and the stiff set of his shoulders relaxed.
Thanks, kiddo,
he said, his voice as sincere as the hand now resting on Harry's shoulder.
Are we going to the bank?
Padfoot nodded.
And the sooner we're done there, the sooner we can get home. Which way do we go?
Harry asked.
This way.
They'd only gone another 100 paces before Harry saw the bank and wondered how he had missed it. Gringotts, as the large golden letters above the door proclaimed, was a huge building made of snowy white marble. Standing either side of the burnished bronze doors, wearing scarlet and gold uniforms, were goblins. Harry didn't stare this time, but his eyes did widen when they bowed them through the doors. Inside, they were faced with another pair of doors, glossy silver this time. Engraved upon them was a message which Harry paused to read. Enter, stranger, but take heed of what awaits the sin of greed. For those who take but do not earn, must pay most dearly in their turn. So if you seek beneath our floors a treasure that was never yours, thief, you have been warned, beware of finding more than treasure there.
What does it mean, more than treasure?
Harry whispered as another pair of goblins bowed them through the silver doors. Inside, a counter ran all the way around, separated only by golden doors that no doubt led to vaults, behind which sat more goblins.
Gringotts vaults are protected by all sorts of things,
Padfoot whispered back as they crossed the vast marble hall to get to a free counter. Most of the other goblins were weighing gemstones or coins or writing in thick ledgers.
All sorts of hexes and wards. I think they've even got a dragon or two. A dragon!
Harry exclaimed and then clapped his hands to his mouth as the shout echoed. Several of the goblins looked up, their black eyes glinting.
Sorry,
Harry said in what was hardly more than a whisper, yet carried to the corners of the hall. Padfoot smiled at him and together they approached a goblin.
Excuse me,
Padfoot said politely. The goblin didn't acknowledge them. He continued writing in his book for a further minute before he finally looked up.
Yes. I've come to make a withdrawal,
Padfoot said.
From which vault?
The goblin asked, showing his pointed teeth.
My family vault,
Padfoot said carefully.
The Black Vault. Mr. Black,
the goblin said, looking interested.
Yes, I do see it now, even if it has been years since you were last here. I suppose you don't have access to your private vault key anymore.
Padfoot stayed quiet and Harry followed his example. The goblin smiled nastily.
I'm a little surprised you've come at all. Surely you know there's a reward for your capture. I'm not here to make trouble,
Padfoot said in a quiet but firm tone.
I came to get my gold and leave.
The goblin said nothing. Padfoot frowned.
I wouldn't have come at all if I had realized how much things had changed. Changed how?
The goblin asked, twining his long fingers together.
I never thought I'd meet a goblin more interested in wizarding affairs than in the satisfaction of an old client,
Padfoot said coolly. The goblin at the counter next to theirs made an angry noise and dropped the rubies he was holding. They scattered all over the counter and spilled onto the floor, but the goblin was too busy listening to pick them up.
Wizarding affairs are profitable these days,
their goblin said with a cruel smile.
So is helping me,
Padfoot said.
Is that a bribe, Mr. Black?
The goblin asked, showing his pointed teeth again.
If you want to be blunt, I'd call it a reward for a professional approach to a delicate situation.
The goblin smiled.
How large is this reward? It would depend on how professional you are. We can be very professional,
the goblin promised, tracing patterns onto the pages of his ledger with one long nail.
In that case, I'll have to insist on a permanent interest rate rise for the Black Vault of say 5%.
The goblin's eyes widened, but he quickly smoothed his expression.
7,
he said shrewdly.
5,
Padfoot said firmly,
as well as 5% of what I'm withdrawing today. I promise you it's a substantial amount. Very well.
The goblin stared at him a moment longer, and then his eyes flicked down to Harry.
Follow me.
The goblin hopped down from his chair and joined them at the front of the counter. On the ground, they were about the same height, though the goblin's head was almost twice as large as Harry's and his legs were only half the length. Another goblin appeared beside them holding a bag of metal-sounding objects.
Here, Gerbok,
he said, passing it over. Their goblin, Gerbok, nodded his thanks, and the other goblin dashed off again.
That reminds me, I'll need bags,
Padfoot said as the three of them crossed the hall.
It'll cost you,
Gerbok said, smiling in a way that made Harry shiver. Padfoot thought for a moment, not really seeming surprised.
I'll give you a galleon for as many bags as I need,
he said eventually.
2. All right,
Padfoot said, winking at Harry, who smiled after a moment's hesitation. He wasn't sure that he liked goblins. The goblin led them through a golden door, and Harry, who had been expecting marble or something equally expensive, was surprised to find they were in a narrow stone passageway, lit only by torches on the walls. Gerbok whistled, and a cart came hurtling around a corner, attached to the little railway tracks Harry had just noticed on the floor.
In you get,
Padfoot said, ushering Harry into the cart. Padfoot clambered in next, and then the goblin, and then, with no visible prompting, they were off. Gerbok didn't steer at all, something which unnerved Harry, yet the cart navigated its way through a maze of passages. Several times, the cart dropped suddenly, or veered off sharply to one side, and Harry, convinced he was about to fall out, had latched onto his godfather. Padfoot, thankfully, didn't seem to mind. If he had done the same to Aunt Petunia or Uncle Vernon, they probably would have saved the cart the trouble and just pushed him off.
Will we see a dragon?
Harry asked as they sped through the darkness.
That's what clinkers are for,
Padfoot answered, waving a hand at the bag in Gerbok's fist.
The older the vault, the more protection it has. Is yours old? One of the oldest, I'd imagine,
Padfoot said rather dryly,
except for goblin-owned vaults. Quite right, Mr. Black,
Gerbok said approvingly as he adjusted the bag of clinkers in his lap. After one particularly steep dip in the track that made Harry glad he hadn't eaten yet, the cart slowed to a stop beside a torch-lit platform. They climbed out, Harry a little unsteadily, and then something cold was pressed into his hand.
Shake it,
Padfoot murmured, giving him a gentle nudge. Harry did, and so did Padfoot and Gerbok, and soon the little platform was echoing with a high-pitched metallic ring.
Follow me,
Gerbok called, leading them down a narrow passageway Harry hadn't noticed. The passageway wasn't lit at all, though they did pass an adjoining passage which was glowing in orange light. Harry walked into the back of the goblin a few times, unable to see, before they finally came out into a circular room. Torches flared into life on the walls. There was only one door, a large, round, bronze one with black carved into it. Gerbok walked right up to it and pressed his hand against it. With a grinding sound, the entire room spun. The vault door was now covering the entrance to the passage they had entered through, while the vault itself was now open. Harry's mouth fell open. In one corner was a collection of expensive-looking heirlooms, armor, a set of blood-stained daggers, a chest overflowing with jewelry, and leather bags the size of Harry's rucksack, all filled with rubies and diamonds and sapphires. The rest of the room, which was about as big as number 4, Privet Drive, was filled with piles of gold, silver, and bronze coins, stacked as tall as Padfoot. Right at the back of the vault was another bronze door, open only wide enough for Harry to be able to see the glint of more treasure through it.
"I'll be needing those bags, Gerbok,"
Padfoot said, sounding a little dazed. Gerbok dug around in the pockets of his scarlet jacket and produced 3 leather bags, each the size of the bag he had kept the clinkers in.
"Extension charms?"
Padfoot asked, accepting them.
"Each will hold around 2,000 galleons,"
Gerbok said.
"You did say a large withdrawal, did you not?"
"Yeah," Padfoot said faintly, accepting one of the bags.
"What's the conversion rate into Muggle money at the moment?" "Approximately 5 pounds to a galleon,"
the goblin said. Harry's eyes widened and then widened again when Padfoot tossed him a bag and told him to fill it with the gold coins. Harry stared at his godfather, who stepped forward, stumbled on an emerald that was the size of his head, and scooped a whole handful of coins into his bag. After a moment, Harry followed suit, but threw in some of the silver and bronze coins too. It took them almost 10 minutes to fill all 3 bags, yet they had hardly made a dent in the piles of treasure. Gerbok shuffled to the door, pressed his palm against it, and it slid back into place, sealing Padfoot's vault.
"How much room do you have in your rucksack?"
Padfoot asked.
"Dunno. A bit,"
Harry said.
"Do you mind if we put this,"
Padfoot hefted the bags of gold,
"in there?"
Harry shook his head. Padfoot opened one of the bags he was holding and took out 3 of the gold coins, which he passed to Harry, who accepted them gingerly, aware he had never had so much money in his life, and pocketed another 3 for himself.
"That should be enough to see us home,"
he said, retying the bag.
"Hold still,"
he said, opening the top of Harry's rucksack. Harry felt him drop the bags of coins in. Not only did he hear the jingle of coins, but his rucksack also tripled in weight.
"Clankers,"
Gerbok said importantly, dealing them out again. Harry shook his. A roar echoed through the tunnels, much closer than Harry would have liked.
"Is that a dragon?"
he whispered, moving closer to his godfather. Padfoot nodded, not seeming worried at all. The 3 of them set off down the cramped passageway again, and when they passed the glowing tunnel, Harry swore he saw a spiny tail disappearing around a corner at the far end. Gerbok led them back to the cart, and a quick ride later, they were getting out again, blinking in the torch light.
"Here, let me,"
Padfoot said, shouldering Harry's rucksack as they walked up the sloped path toward the golden doors.
"Thanks,"
Harry said, brushing his sweaty fringe out of his face.
Well, well,"
the goblin said, looking from Padfoot to Harry. He took a step closer, lifting one long-nailed finger to brush a strand of Harry's hair off of his forehead. Padfoot froze.
"This is an unexpected turn of events." "I don't know what you're talking about,"
Padfoot said stiffly.
"Oh, I'm quite sure you do."
Gerbok gave Padfoot a feral smile, which he then turned on Harry.
"Even among goblins your story is legendary, Harry Potter."
"He knows me. I don't even look like me." Harry stared.
How?
He said, looking at the goblin, who was still smiling. Padfoot had gone white, but even as Harry watched he regained color and drew himself up to his full height.
Would you like his autograph now or the next time we visit?
Padfoot said coldly. Gerbok looked a little insulted.
Or, would you like to skip that part altogether and do your job?
Gerbok watched them both curiously for a very long time.
This way, Mr. Black,
the goblin said at last, his black eyes glittering in the light of the marble hall. Padfoot looked relieved, and the instant Gerbok turned around, he gestured for Harry to flatten his fringe.
I'd like 1 bag converted into Muggle money,
Padfoot said, his voice still cold.
And you can take your 5% from that.
Gerbok accepted the offered bag and disappeared behind the counter with it. Padfoot seemed on edge the entire time they waited and sighed in relief when the goblin returned and passed over a stack of 20-pound notes. Padfoot tucked those into a pocket in his dress.
Do you not want your key, Mr. Potter?
Gerbok asked, as they turned away from the counter.
My what?
Harry asked, frowning at the goblin.
I think he means the key to your Gringotts vault,
Padfoot said.
I have a vault. James and Lily wouldn't have left you with nothing,
Padfoot said, shaking his head as if Harry were mad.
You are entitled to the small fortune in Vault 687,
Gerbok said.
The contents of the Potter family vault will become available to you when you come of age.
Harry said, looking at Padfoot, who shrugged.
I guess I'll take my key now, then, if I'm allowed to. Identification won't be necessary,
Gerbok said, eyeing Harry's scar.
Wait here, please.
He returned a moment later carrying a small golden key.
When you wish to access your vault, present this to the goblin at the counter.
Harry nodded and pocketed it.
Have a good evening,
Gerbok said, with another curious look at Harry. Padfoot nodded stiffly.
Thank you,
Harry said. As they left, Harry got the impression that Padfoot was walking as fast as was possible without running. Harry was almost jogging to keep up. Outside, Diagon Alley was now almost empty and rather dark, and this seemed to make Padfoot jumpy. He kept staring at shadows, constantly checking to make sure Harry was nearby, and his knuckles were white around his wand.
How did he know who I was?
Harry asked as they headed back toward the pub they had come in through. Padfoot glanced around and then leaned closer.
Your scar,
Padfoot said, very quietly.
My scar?
Harry whispered, trying to decide which of his 1,000 questions to ask first. Padfoot nodded.
I know how frustrating this must be,
he said with a grimace.
If we had had more time, I would have explained everything to you before we came, but it won't take Dumbledore long to realize I've got you and then he'll come looking. Who's Dumbledore? Headmaster of Hogwarts,
Padfoot said, starting to walk again.
A good friend of mine, and of your mum and dad. He's also the last person we want to see right now. Why? He doesn't know I'm innocent. You would be back with your aunt and uncle and I'd be back in my cell before either of us knew what was going on. And he knows you've got me. If he doesn't already, he will soon,
Padfoot said grimly. End of chapter. Chapter 4, Padfoot's Tale. Padfoot and Harry stood before a door covered in peeling black paint. At least Harry assumed it was a door. There was a silver snake knocker and a doorbell alongside but no door handle. Padfoot tapped it with his wand and it swung open.
This is home,
Padfoot said grimly. Home, Harry thought, smiling as he stepped inside, the floorboards under the carpet squeaked, and cast a glance around. It was very dark, he couldn't see anything outside Padfoot's circle of wand light. The place stank like old newspapers, mold, and dust, and every step that either Harry or Padfoot took made the floor creak horribly. "I still like it here better than I did at the Dursleys," he thought, squinting at a lumpy-looking umbrella stand. Portraits covered peeling wallpaper, and their eyes seemed to follow Harry and Padfoot. It sounded as though they were whispering, but Harry was fairly sure it was actually his trainers in the dust. They passed a set of double doors on the left, which had tarnished, silver serpent handles, and a door on the right with a matching one.
"Creature must have died,"
Padfoot whispered cheerfully, as he looked at the footsteps they were leaving.
"Creature?"
Harry asked.
"My mum's old house elf."
They both jumped as the stairs creaked.
"This place is a mess,"
he breathed, looking around.
"When were you last here?"
Harry whispered, thinking it was hardly surprising that Aunt Petunia cleaned so regularly if houses could end up like this. Padfoot thought for a moment.
"I was 16, I reckon."
He ran a hand over his face.
"I never thought I'd be back." "Why not?" "I hated it here,"
he said with a little laugh.
"Are you opposed to sleeping downstairs tonight? I don't know what state the bedrooms are in and—" "Down here's fine,"
Harry whispered.
"The kitchen's probably the best place,"
Padfoot murmured, leading Harry to the end of the hall.
"Watch your step."
They descended a narrow, creaky staircase which led into a cavernous kitchen. There was an enormous table in the middle of the room, and chairs. As they entered, something small and grey scurried across the floor and hid under a chair. Padfoot flicked his wand at it, and there was a high-pitched squeal and a puff of dust.
"What was that?"
Harry asked.
"Dust bunny,"
Padfoot said.
"The house is probably infested." "Are they dangerous?" "Not unless you're carpet."
Padfoot jabbed his wand in the direction of movement on the far side of the kitchen, and there was another faint squeal. Padfoot had another quick look around and strode over to a small cabinet that rested against the wall by the stairs.
"Can you hold my wand, please?"
Harry held it like a torch so that Padfoot could see. He shifted a few things in the cabinet and then pulled out an old newspaper and a long piece of wood.
"Over here."
Harry followed his godfather to a big fireplace.
"Do you have matches?"
Harry asked, watching him scrunch the newspaper up.
"I have a wand,"
Padfoot said, gesturing for it. Harry passed it over immediately, eager to see more magic. A moment later, a warm fire was crackling in the grate. Padfoot used his wand to clear the floor by the fireplace and then, to Harry's amazement, conjured a pair of bright red sleeping bags.
"Do you want anything?"
Padfoot asked as Harry kicked off his shoes and slid into his sleeping bag.
"Food or a drink?" "No, thanks."
They had sandwiches and hot chocolate on the night bus on the way back.
"Padfoot?"
Harry asked tentatively.
"Yeah, kiddo." "I was. Is it later yet?"
Padfoot stared at the dancing flames.
"I suppose so,"
he said grimly, picking a thread out of his sleeping bag. Harry sat straighter, eyes fixed on his godfather.
"Everything starts at Hogwarts, really, where students go to learn magic. I got my letter at 11, like all magical kids, and so did your mum and dad, Remus Lupin and Peter Pettigrew."
His hands tightened into fists at the mention of the last name.
"I met your mum and dad and Remus on the train, and Peter after sorting. We were all sorted into the same house. We, the boys, became friends and called ourselves the Marauders. While we were going through school, a wizard named Voldemort started gaining power. He was evil and had decided to cleanse the world of anyone he didn't think was magical enough. At first it was just whispers. Propaganda about Muggle-borns and stories that a group called the Death Eaters that was recruiting. One of my old teachers was one.
He sighed.
Things started to get particularly bad toward the end of my 6th year, people were going missing, Voldemort was recruiting students and killing Muggles for the fun of it. It was a mess.
Muggles? Harry asked with a shiver, pulling the hood of his sleeping bag up a little higher.
Non-magical folk, like your aunt and uncle. Anyway, Dumbledore, the man we were talking about in Diagon Alley, formed an organization, the Order of the Phoenix, to fight back. I joined in my 7th year and so did your mum and dad, Remus and Peter. Your mum and dad got married, Lily trained to be a healer, James and I went through the Aura training program. Auras are dark wizard catchers, like the Muggle equivalent of policemen, I suppose, and in our spare time, we fought against Voldemort. About a month before you were born, Dumbledore was in a job interview when a seer made a prophecy about you.
Me? Harry asked.
What did it say? Ask me again in a year or two,
Padfoot said evasively.
One of Voldemort's spies heard the prophecy, or part of it, and Voldemort set out to find you. He wanted me. Your mum and dad went into hiding in August, trying to keep you safe. We, me, Moony and Peter, visited almost daily or James just about went mad, being cooped up all the time. You were safe enough, you lived at Hogwarts for most of the time, but your mum got sick of it. Said she wanted to find somewhere they could live safely, without people coming and going all the time. Dumbledore, Moony and I found a house in Godric's Hollow, a little cottage, and they moved in just before you turned 1. None of us were allowed to visit for a while because we didn't want to draw attention to the place, but eventually things went back to normal and we visited all the time. There was a constant guard of Order members living in the house, me and Moony, mostly, but others too, to keep it safe. Dumbledore worried one of them might say something, though, or they'd be tortured into saying something. We knew there was a spy in our ranks, although no one wanted to suspect anyone else, and it was only a matter of time before word got out about where Lily and James were. Late in October, Dumbledore suggested they put the place under the Fidelius charm. The what? It's a spell that hides a secret inside a living soul. I was going to be the secret keeper, the one who would know where they were. I was planning to go into hiding too, but what got me was that I was such an obvious choice. I knew the second Voldemort heard about the charm, he'd come after me, and I also knew that if he tortured me, I might tell him where they were.
He laughed once, without humor.
I decided to be clever,
he spat.
I convinced Lily and James to change secret keepers at the last minute, to Peter. He was weak, the last person Voldemort would ever think to come after. He agreed to it and we cast the spell. The plan was that Voldemort would still come after me, but if he caught me, I wouldn't be able to tell him where you were. The night after we cast the spell, Peter ran off to Voldemort and told him where to find Lily and James. I was staying at Remus that night, he was sick, and I had a feeling. I went to check up on Peter and found his house empty, with no signs of a struggle. I arrived at your place a moment later and found it ruined. James,
Padfoot choked,
was dead. In the hallway. Lily, you were sitting in your crib, staring at your mum and...
Padfoot drew in a shuddering breath and then his face closed over and he took several slow deep breaths, his eyes not quite there.
Hagrid took you from me,
Padfoot said finally, sounding a little too calm.
He had orders from Dumbledore to take you to your aunt. The second he left, I went after Peter. I hunted for 2 days until I finally tracked him down. What happened?
Harry asked. Padfoot had started to tremble.
He shouted that I was the one to betray your mum and dad, that I was the one who handed them to Voldemort, and when I lifted my wand to curse him into the ground, he blew the street up. He killed 13 muggles. I only survived because I got a shield charm up in time, and amidst all the chaos, he transformed into a rat and disappeared into the sewers. Hit wizards arrived within minutes and found me on my knees, laughing at the hole in the ground. And they took you to prison?
Harry asked. Padfoot shuddered.
Yes. What happened to Voldemort? You never said. He vanished. I don't know what you did, but you stopped him. People say he died, but I don't think that's right. So he'll come back. One day, I think,
Padfoot said, staring into the dying fire. Harry digested this in silence.
And Peter? Will he come back too? Not if he's smart,
Padfoot growled, his eyes glinting dangerously.
Why did he become a rat?
Harry asked.
He's what wizards call an animagus. It means he can turn into an animal at will. Yes, but why did he choose to be a rat? He didn't. It's all based on personality. How we didn't see it, I'll never understand.
Padfoot muttered, and Harry got the impression he wasn't talking to him.
Are you an animagus too?
Harry asked through a yawn.
I am,
Padfoot said with a small smile. Harry perked up.
Really? What animal? I'll show you.
Harry fixed his godfather with an expectant look. As Padfoot smiled, his teeth grew, his ears stretched taller, black fur grew over his face, his fingers retracted into his hands, and then...
Brilliant,
he said, staring at his godfather. Padfoot barked and bounded forward, tail wagging, to lick Harry's face. Harry laughed and patted his head. Padfoot changed back.
You're you again?
Harry exclaimed.
Who else would I be?
Padfoot asked.
I mean your hair,
Harry said.
And your eyes. You look like you did at the playground, not like you did at Diagon Alley. Side effect of transformation,
Padfoot said, shrugging.
It destroys all the charms I cast earlier because I have to go back to looking like me.
That didn't make much sense to Harry at all, but he was too tired to think about it in any detail. He yawned, fighting to keep his eyes open. Padfoot climbed back into his own sleeping bag.
Do you like to explore?
Padfoot asked as they both lay there, watching the fire. Harry shrugged, his eyes slipping shut. He had always been good at finding hiding places at school and at number 4, mainly so he'd have somewhere to go when Dudley went Harry hunting.
Why?
He asked sleepily.
We'll explore the house tomorrow,
Padfoot said.
I haven't been here for 10 years, so I don't know how much has changed, and then we'll need to start cleaning to make this place livable. We can't sleep in the kitchen every night.
Padfoot started to say something else, but sleep claimed Harry before he could finish. Something poked Harry. He frowned without opening his eyes. Aunt Petunia never comes into my cupboard, he thought, rolling over. Something poked him again.
All right, I'm up.
He mumbled, forcing his eyelids open.
Arg.
Standing over him was a pale blob with big eyes and bigger ears. Harry crawled backwards, hands searching for his glasses.
What is this in Mistress' house?
The thing asked in a voice like a bullfrog's croak. It can talk. Harry thought, his fingers closing around his glasses. He jammed them onto his face and Padfoot's dusty kitchen came into focus, as did the creature in front of him. It was perhaps one of the ugliest things he had ever seen. It was roughly human-shaped, though only half the size, but with long arms and legs, a larger-than-natural head and a bulbous, snout-like nose. Folds of skin hung off its bony frame and it was naked, except for a grey loincloth. Harry glanced at Padfoot's empty sleeping bag, feeling his fear spike. He was used to being alone, but not in unfamiliar places.
Who are you? The brat wants to know creature's name.
The thing said, looking revolted.
Creature doesn't talk to brats, oh no. Creature's poor mistress would never forgive creature.
The thing turned its big, bloodshot eyes on Harry, who scrambled to his feet and backed away. Harry watched it carefully, positioning himself on the opposite side of the dusty table. He was fairly sure he could outrun it if he had to, but he had never seen anything like it before, which meant it was probably magical.
Padfoot!
He called, hoping his godfather was nearby.
Is there another brat here? Creature didn't hear it, but little beasts can be silent.
The thing mumbled something Harry couldn't understand and then let loose a blood-curdling shriek.
Thieves!
It shouted.
Thieves in the House of Black!
Harry edged toward the stairs. He heard a loud crack. And out of the corner of his eye saw the thing disappear. Harry turned and sprinted up the stairs. A small part of Harry's mind wondered if the creature in the kitchen had done anything to his godfather, but he discarded that with a shiver. Padfoot was a wizard. He'd be safe. He skidded into the hallway, which was empty too, and the layer of dust on the staircase leading to the first floor was undisturbed.
Padfoot!
Harry called.
Who's there?
Screeched a woman's voice. Harry jumped, barely managing to stifle a yell as the curtains on the wall in front of him flew open of their own accord.
Who dares disturb the noble and most ancient House of Black? Name yourself.
Harry, Harry said, his eyes darting around to try to locate the source of the noise.
What is your family name, Harry?
She asked haughtily.
My family. You father's name? James. James what? Potter. James Potter. Oh. Him. Yes. Harry Potter, did you say?
The voice asked, sounding curious now.
The boy who defeated the Dark Lord. I guess so,
Harry told the empty corridor.
Come here, Harry Potter,
she said imperiously. Harry walked toward the sound of the voice.
There's not much of you.
She sniffed.
You're just a boy. What are you doing in my house?
Harry finally found the speaker. It was a portrait of an old woman with grey hair and cold black eyes. He blinked a few times, just to convince himself that the portrait was in fact speaking into him.
How did you get in?
The woman asked, shifting in her chair.
I'll have to get creature to update the security. Through the door,
Harry said, not understanding the question.
Liar!
She shrieked. Harry jumped and tripped.
Only a black can open the door to the home of my fathers. How did you come here? Well, Padfoot's last name is Black,
Harry said from the floor. The woman released a scream of pure rage.
Him. Oh, yes, it would be him. Blood traitor. Abomination. Shame of my flesh.
Harry didn't dare move.
Creature!
She shouted.
Creature!
There was a loud crack. And then the thing from the kitchen appeared beside Harry, who could only stare.
Creature is here, mistress,
the thing said, stroking the screaming portrait.
Mistress needn't worry.
The front door swung open and then there was a quiet creaking noise. Padfoot was standing there, blonde again, holding a paper bag.
What in Merlin's name is going on in here?
He asked.
You!
The woman in the portrait screamed, her eyes popping.
You! How dare you show your traitorous face here? Shame of my blood! Ungrateful! Blood traitor! Freak!
Padfoot, who had looked startled at the commotion in the hallway, dropped the bag he was holding and ran forward to wrench the curtain over the portrait. The screaming subsided as soon as the portrait was covered.
Master has returned,
Creature croaked, groveling at Padfoot's feet.
Master broke his mother's heart.
He muttered.
Master doesn't belong here, oh no, and Creature doesn't want to serve nasty master. That's enough, Creature,
Padfoot snapped.
Go to your cupboard and stay there until I deal with you.
The thing glared at Padfoot but vanished with another crack. Harry was staring at the place where the thing had vanished.
What was that thing?
He asked.
Creature,
Padfoot said, looking irritated.
The portraits of my mother, oh, portraits.
Padfoot said, his eyes widening.
Creature.
Creature returned with another loud crack. And a dirty look.
Master's grown even more fickle than Creature remembers. Do this, Master says, and then takes it back just after, oh, yes, such a temperamental little. Shut up.
Creature gave them both a withering look.
In one of the bedrooms upstairs, there's a portrait of Phineas Nigellus, he was Hogwarts headmaster. I want you to burn it. Now. And any others paintings that could tell anyone we're here. Before they have a chance to tell anyone. I forbid you from telling them why. And I forbid you from saying anything about me or Harry while you do it. Understand?
The elf gave him a look of loathing and vanished again. Harry stared at his godfather.
Phineas Nigellus has a portrait in the headmaster's office. My parents used to have him keep track of me. The last thing we need, though, is him telling Dumbledore where we are before we get proper security on this place. You mean all portraits can talk? In the wizarding world,
Padfoot said. Harry blinked, trying to make sense of all this.
It isn't a problem as long as they can't leave the house. How about we head down to the kitchen?
Padfoot suggested.
I don't want to set Mum off again.
Harry nodded fervently, watching the portrait out of the corner of his eye. Padfoot grabbed the bag and the two headed down to the kitchen.
So what's Creature?
Harry asked as Padfoot restarted last night's fire.
He's a house elf,
Padfoot said, getting up. Behind him, the fire crackled cheerfully.
Nasty little sod, not all of them, just this one. I thought he had died when I saw the state of this place. I ducked out to get food, I thought you would be hungry. Creature must have heard me leaving and come to investigate. What do house elves do? Old wizarding families have them to cook and clean, some even look after kids.
Padfoot glanced around the filthy kitchen with distaste.
I don't think Creature's done either for years. Do you like apples?
He asked, digging around in the bag. Harry nodded.
Are you sure? I bought oranges and pears too, just in case. Apples are fine,
Harry said, a little shocked. Usually he just ate what he was given. He accepted it with a shy smile.
Thanks.
He traced patterns on its shiny green skin with a dirty fingernail before looking up again.
Why was the portrait talking? Is it alive? I'd say some of my mother's evil seeped into the walls while she was living here,
Padfoot said, curling his lip. Harry stared around, half expecting Padfoot's mother's ghost to appear.
That aura stayed here when she died and someone's obviously embedded that into a painting to keep creature happy. You really hate it here, do you?
Harry said quietly. Padfoot sighed.
My mother was a hag I was never good enough for, and I loved my brother but we were very different people. Creature used to follow me around and tell me how much my mother hated me. My father wasn't home much but when he was usually drunk.
Harry winced. He had seen Uncle Vernon drunk once and it wasn't something he'd forget anytime soon.
It's hard not to see things as they were,
Padfoot said, shrugging.
That fireplace, for example, was where I lost my first tooth because I slipped getting out of the flow. My mother smacked me over the head for bleeding on the rug that used to be there and I spent the rest of the day in my room. The table, he continued with a wave of his hand, was where my father beat me in front of all of my relatives for getting into Gryffindor instead of Slytherin.
Padfoot turned to stare at the cabinet that held the firewood and smiled slightly.
That cabinet,
he said, grinning now,
is where I had to hide Remus and James because they arrived to surprise me for my birthday, and all my relatives showed up. My dad came here several times,
Padfoot said, nodding. Harry smiled.
How long did they have to hide? 4.5 hours I think it was,
Padfoot said, smirking.
It's a good thing they were both skinny or they'd never have fit. Right, no more talking until you finish your apple and I finish mine.
Harry stared down at the untouched fruit in his hand, bemused. He had forgotten it was there.
What are we doing after we eat?
Harry asked.
You ask a lot of questions,
Padfoot said.
Sorry,
Harry said quickly.
I never said it was a bad thing.
Padfoot looked amused. Harry was relieved to see.
We're going exploring,
he added and then frowned suddenly.
And I thought I said no talking.
Harry grinned.
Ah, Minerva. To what do I owe the pleasure?
Albus Dumbledore asked, tucking a half-finished declination for the position of minister into his desk drawer. Millicent was planning to retire at the end of the year and wanted him to take her place. He looked up, the smile slipping off his face.
Is something wrong?
His usually stern Transfiguration professor was looking rather flustered. Her black hair was falling out of its immaculate bun and her robes were creased from extended wear.
Harry Potter wasn't at Arabella Figs today,
she said briskly.
I see,
he said, his lips twitching.
Would you care for a lemon drop?
She batted the bowl of sweets away.
He wasn't in the car when they left and he didn't come back with them either,
she said, folding her arms.
Are you upset that he was left behind?
Dumbledore asked gently.
Or that you didn't get to see him at Arabella's?
She conjured a chair and sat down.
I checked the home,
she admitted, a little defiantly.
He wasn't there. Albus, I've just got a feeling that something isn't right, if he wasn't there and he wasn't with his relatives.
Her eyes found the newspaper article on his desk, the one with Sirius Black's picture on it.
Sirius could not have taken the boy,
he said, seeing at last what had upset her.
The wards are failing,
she said.
I could barely feel them, even as a cat.
Albus' eyebrows rose. Animals had better senses than humans did and were exponentially better at detecting magical activity.
You're sure?
He asked, knowing even as he said it that Minerva would never come to him unless she was certain.
Of course I am.
Albus sat quietly, letting the last few minutes sink in. He had grown complacent after the war, and not needed to make overly authoritative decisions for a long time, Finally, his mind fought its way out of its detached stupor. He turned to Minerva.
I need you to get to Augusta Longbottom's house as soon as possible. Keep her and Neville safe until I arrive. And the others? Safe for the moment, I think.
Minerva nodded stiffly.
What should I tell Augusta? She'll hardly be pleased when I show up on her doorstep. That I am searching for answers and will inform her when I find them. She may raise any problems with me when I arrive.
Minerva nodded stiffly and swept out of the office. Albus got to his feet and strode over to the fireplace. Reasons the wards could have failed bounced around in his head, and worry waltzed around his insides. Surely Sirius couldn't have taken the boy. Best to be certain, however.
The Hog's Head,
he said firmly, stepping into the green flames.
Albus. Good evening, Aberforth,
Albus said, running past his brother.
I know this is terribly rude of me, but manners must come second to time tonight. Wah.
As soon as he was outside, Albus fixed an image of Petunia Dursley's house in his mind and disapparated. He stumbled a little upon his arrival in the Dursleys' driveway, but didn't allow that to stop him. He strode up the garden path and pressed the doorbell, all the while casting his mind out. The door swung open.
Whatever you're selling, we're not interested,
said a large man with a bushy mustache and very little neck.
Good evening, Vernon,
Albus said politely. The man's small eyes narrowed as he took in Albus' purple robes.
What do you want? May I come in? No. Vernon. Who's at the door?
Albus saw Petunia Dursley appear in the hallway behind her husband and pale at the sight of him.
You,
she said.
Me,
Albus said smiling pleasantly.
Is Harry home? What do you want with the boy?
She asked, pursing her lips.
To speak with him,
Albus said, noting that she had gone a shade paler.
You can't,
she said.
He isn't here,
Vernon said gleefully.
I beg your pardon.
Albus said calmly, adjusting his hat.
He isn't here. Where else would he be?
Albus asked, fearing the answer.
His godfather took him.
A cold, sick feeling settled itself in Albus' stomach, making him rather glad he hadn't eaten.
When?
He asked, his voice shaking.
Last night,
Petunia said.
I sent you a letter this morning.
She added unwillingly.
To tell you he's gone and that we don't want anything more to do with him or you or any of your kind. I'll keep an eye on the post,
Albus said.
And I'll make the effort not to bother you in the future, but for now, I'm already here and have a few questions to ask yet.
Both Dursleys made disapproving noises.
Can you describe the man? Tall, black hair,
Vernon said.
Filthy,
was his wife's contribution. Albus drew his wand, making both muggles hiss.
Is this him?
He waved his wand, causing a smoky image of Sirius Black to form in the space between them.
That's him,
Petunia said.
Thinner though. And you just let him take the boy? He wanted him,
Vernon said shrugging.
We didn't. He's his godfather,
Aunt Petunia said.
He's legally entitled to the boy and the boy seemed happy to go with him.
She paused, eyeing him critically and then glanced around to see that they weren't being watched.
Are you done here? I don't want the neighbors asking questions tomorrow.
Albus closed his eyes and took a deep breath. There was little point in asking if they had been given Harry's new contact details.
Yes,
he said. The door slammed shut in his face. He turned and walked away from the doorstep. Somehow, his wards had failed, or Sirius had found a way around them. And now he had Harry. Albus set off down the street searching for any magical traces he could find. There were several overlapping sets of appearance alteration charms, specifically, those taught in the Aura training program. Sirius, what have you done? A little further up Privet Drive he found marks left by a hover charm and a light spell, and beside them, the equivalent of magical tire tracks. Without hesitation, Albus flung out his wand. Bang!
Welcome to the night business. My name is J.E., Professor Dumbledore. Good evening, Jeremy,
Albus said, giving his past student a strained smile.
I am in need of assistance and think you might be able to help. Yeah, Sure,
he said looking a little startled.
We can take you anywhere. London, please. To the Ministry.
Albus said, pressing a galleon into his hand.
Is the flu network down?
Albus chuckled.
I'm serious.
Jeremy said.
No, I'm merely in the mood for an alternate form of transportation.
Jeremy gave him a skeptical look.
Did you pick up a man and a boy here last night?
Albus asked as he settled himself on the end of a four-poster bed. Jeremy frowned.
Yeah,
he said thoughtfully.
Yeah, we did. How'd you know that? A story for another day. Could you describe them, please? Blonde, both of them,
Jeremy said, squinting.
Blue eyes too, I think. The man was tallish, not quite as tall as you, but close, with a round face, and the kid was scrawny with glasses. Indeed. And where did you take them? Leaky Cauldron the first time,
Jeremy said, steadying himself against Albus' four-poster as the bus took off.
Second time we got them from the Leaky Cauldron and took them to King's Cross Station. Did they enter the station? I don't think so, no,
Jeremy said slowly.
They crossed to the other side of the road as soon as they were off.
But they could have doubled back. Or they could have kept walking. You always were too clever for your own good, Sirius.
Ha, happy? The boy, was he happy? Seemed like it. They were laughing when they got on and off, both times.
Jeremy peered out the window.
We're here, sir. Thank you, Jeremy,
Albus said, spying the peeling phone box.
Have a good evening. You too, Professor,
Jeremy said, bemused, as Albus strode off the bus and into the night. 10 minutes later, Minister Millicent Bagnold collapsed into her chair and fixed Albus with a stunned look. She was an older witch, though still young compared to Albus, with blonde hair that was fading to white and very thin lips that were perpetually pursed.
The Ministry will do everything it can,
she said in her brisk voice.
I'll send orders to Mrs. Pettigrew's home immediately, and to Mrs. Longbottom's later tonight.
She wrote something down and then paused.
You're sure about the others? Both are perfectly capable of protecting themselves, but I will present the offer when I visit.
Millicent passed the note to a small owl that was perched by the window and it flew out of the office.
Will you join the search yourself? When I have the time,
Albus said. He owed Harry that much, and Lily and James too. He knew it was Sirius' fault they had died, but perhaps if he had been a little more forceful in his offer to be their secret keeper, he shook his head to clear it.
I'll have the Department of Magical Records monitor the deaths list,
she said quietly. Albus closed his eyes.
And the Department of Management and Control of Magical Children will monitor Harry Potter's trace. It might take some time to find, given they don't usually bother with the files of children under 11, but exceptions can and will be made. Is Black capable of installing wards that block the trace?
Perhaps, Albus said tiredly, but hope was beginning to stir inside him.
He was a gifted student, though it would surprise me if he thought of it so quickly. He's already used magic around the boy. Then he's already slipped up. Let's hope he does so again and we can have Potter back to his family by morning. I'll be required to launch a proper investigation,
Millicent said. Albus nodded.
And I can't do that without an explanation. What will the public story be?
Albus sighed and ducked as an owl bearing a green envelope flew in.
The truth. That Harry Potter was kidnapped by Sirius Black. Jeremy Phillips, the conductor of the night bus, saw them. They were on the night bus? That's a bold move for Black. Hidden in plain sight,
Albus said with a sigh.
He's always been clever. Reckless though. With any hope, that's what will catch him,
Albus said.
He was a Gryffindor after all. Was he really? I'd have picked him for Slytherin. I'm afraid that side of him was buried so deep that even our sorting hat couldn't find it,
Albus said sadly. He stood, tucking a loose strand of his beard into his belt.
I'm afraid you must excuse me, Millicent. There are others I need to talk to regarding the events of last night. Of course,
she said, getting up to open the office door.
You'll be in contact, I take it. Expect my owl in the morning. And if the Aurors find anything before then, I'll let you know,
she promised. End of chapter. Chapter 5, The Boy Who Disappeared. For all that Aunt Petunia had seemed to hate Padfoot's wand the day before, Harry thought she might have made good use of one herself. The 1/4 of an inch thick dust that covered everything vanished with a flick of Padfoot's wrist, and a murmured spell was all that was needed to scrub the faded wallpaper clean and replace it, or have the sponges polish the grimy windows all by themselves. It was odd, very odd, to go from being oblivious to magic's existence one day, to living with someone who used it for even the most mundane tasks the next. There were 3 bathrooms in Grimmauld Place and the only thing that worked was a single shower on the 2nd floor. If either of them wanted to use the toilet, they had to go to the public bathroom in the small park across the road. Padfoot insisted on magical disguises, like the ones they had used the night before, that changed with each trip, and also insisted they change clothes each time, which was easier said than done. Harry only had a pair of faded, 2 big jeans, a pair of baggy shorts and a few of Dudley's oversized shirts, and the only clothes Padfoot owned was the dirty dress, which wizards called robes, he had worn the day before, and whatever he could find in the house. He had received an odd look from a woman at the park for wearing his brother's embroidered waistcoat and pinstriped trousers, and an odder look from the man who served them at the supermarket. Kreacher had disapproved of Padfoot's attire too, but for completely different reasons.
The blood trader's trying to pretend he's a Black again, he muttered. Oh, yes, Kreacher knows. Kreacher sees it. Oh, but if poor Mistress and Master Regulus were to see, Master Regulus would die of shame to see his fine clothes on Master's ungrateful back. They say he went to Azkaban for murder. Oh, Kreacher doesn't doubt it, he always had a nasty temper, and to think Master Regulus' best waistcoat is being worn by cruel, murdering Master. Oh, shut up,
Padfoot snapped, tugging at the offending article. It was rather tight. It seemed Padfoot had broader shoulders than his brother, and Padfoot didn't seem to like wearing it much at all if his grimace was anything to judge by.
Manor of Frigus.
he muttered, tapping one of the cupboards inside the pantry.
Ah, finally! What did you do? Refrigeration charm.
Harry looked over with interest, but it looked like a normal cupboard to him. Curious, he reached out and then pulled his hand away from the cold.
Could you pass the milk?
He asked Harry.
Not even a please,
Creature said in his croaky voice from the pantry doorway, watching the pair of them.
Not that the brat deserves it, but mistress would still be so ashamed to see her blood talking like a wretched mud-blood. What's a mud-blood?
Harry asked. Padfoot dropped the milk. It landed on his foot and spilt everywhere, soaking his socks and the pinstriped trousers. Creature let out a shriek, snapped his fingers and the mess vanished.
Don't say that word,
Padfoot said in a rather scary voice.
Not ever. Do you understand?
Harry nodded, feeling very small.
Get off, Creature,
Padfoot said irritably, kicking the elf away. Creature was lying at his feet, inspecting the damage done to the trousers. Padfoot sighed.
That word is... well... a rather nasty name for a witch or wizard born into a muggle family.
Padfoot's face darkened.
Like your mum. What do you call them, then? Muggle-borns. Did you hear that, Creature? I forbid you from using the M-word, that particular M-word, ever again.
Creature looked like he had been forced to drink something particularly unpleasant. He skulked out of the pantry, muttering under his breath.
I really am sorry about him,
Padfoot said, staring at the elf's back with dislike.
Is he always like that? Pretty much.
There was a croaky scream from upstairs, a loud thump, and then Mrs. Black's horrid portrait began to shriek. Padfoot looked a little afraid, but he stood and slipped out of the pantry, his wand clutched in his hand.
Stay here,
he told Harry in a quiet voice and crept up the stairs. There was another shrill yell and thump. Harry waited a moment before he sneaked over to the stairs and peered up. He couldn't see anything but the wall at the top, so he risked the ascension. He couldn't see the main hallway, the dining room walls blocked it from view, and so when nothing immediately attacked, he ventured out a little further and glanced around the corner. A lumpy umbrella stand zoomed past and landed with a thump and a puff of dust. Something beneath it squealed. Creature let out a little triumphant noise and Padfoot, who Harry spotted at the bottom of the stairs, let out a laugh as Creature sent the umbrella stand after another dust bunny.
Harry!
He called.
You can come up if you would like.
Harry stepped out into the hallway a little guiltily.
That was fast,
Padfoot commented, raising an eyebrow. Harry didn't say anything but felt his face flaming up. He wondered what Padfoot would say. Uncle Vernon would have sent him to his cupboard by now. Padfoot gave him a contemplative look, leaned out of the way as the umbrella stand flew by, and then said,
Next time, you should wait longer before showing yourself. It's not as suspicious.
Harry stared.
And stomping about, or pretending to be out of breath is something you might want to consider,
he added thoughtfully.
Just for effect. You're not. You don't? I don't what?
Padfoot asked, patting the stair beside him. Harry sat a little nervously.
You're not angry? No.
Padfoot said. His expression flickered and he looked troubled.
I'm really not cut out for this whole parenting thing, am I?
Before Harry had a chance to answer that, he shrugged and let out a bark-like laugh.
Tell you what, you eat your vegetables tonight with dinner and we'll call it even. Deal? Okay,
Harry said. Padfoot frowned.
I'm definitely doing it wrong. You should have found that unreasonable. Sorry,
Harry said.
Don't apologize, it's not your fault.
Harry stared at him. Padfoot was quiet, the only noises were those made by Creature and the dust bunnies popping out of existence, and then said, "Fuck it." Harry's eyebrows climbed but he didn't appear to notice.
I'll do this guardian thing my way. I'll be as reasonable as I damn well want and you can just deal with that. And I'd appreciate if you didn't use that word I used before,
Padfoot added, looking sheepish.
Your mother would kill me. Would my dad think?
Harry asked curiously.
He'd find it funny,
Padfoot said, smiling slightly.
He and Remus probably would have had a bet going about which word I'd let slip first, or how old you'd be before I corrupted you.
The reaction fit with the laughing face Harry had seen in Padfoot's mirror the night before. Slowly, he was building an idea of what his parents had been like, and the more he found out, which was still reasonably little, the more he wished he had had the chance to know them. Padfoot sniggered from next to him. Harry followed his gaze to Creature, who was trying to squash another dust bunny.
Why doesn't he just use magic?
Harry asked, thinking about Padfoot dealing with them last night.
House elves and dust bunnies are mortal enemies,
Padfoot said, shrugging.
Some house elves just want them gone, others get rather.
Creature shrieked.
Well, rather like Creature, and figure a painful death's better, I suppose. Mortal enemies. A house elf lives to please,
Padfoot said, and they both watched as Creature stomped on one of the little grey creatures.
A dust bunny is living proof that an elf's failed to keep the house clean. They take it as a personal insult. But Creature's been here for years,
Harry said.
Shouldn't they all be gone by now?
Padfoot thought for a moment.
No. After my mother died, I think Creature recognized on some level, a very deep, subconscious level, mind, that he wasn't serving anyone anymore. House elves only take pride in their work when someone's around to appreciate it, or punish them for not doing it. Now that we're here, he'll take some pride in the house. What are dust bunnies?
Harry asked, his eyes following one as it hopped past with Creature in close pursuit.
Are they alive?
They were quite small, the size of mice rather than rabbits, and grey, with long ears and round bodies.
Not really. They're magic.
Padfoot said.
A muggle house gets dirty if it's not looked after, right?
Harry nodded.
Same with wizarding houses. The wards weaken a bit, if there are any, and magical residue leaks out and forms those.
He pointed at one of the bunnies which was contentedly nibbling on a patch of frayed carpet.
When they die isn't quite the right word, but it's the only one I can think of. The magic goes back into reinforcing the house and its occupants. So they, did you call them wards?
Padfoot nodded.
Are weak. I'll need to do something about them soon,
Padfoot said thoughtfully.
But getting rid of dust bunnies is probably a good start.
Harry watched Creature stamp another one into the carpet.
How?
Padfoot grinned wickedly, and then it wasn't a man sitting there, but a large, shaggy dog. Harry jumped. That was going to take time to get used to. Padfoot leapt up and barked at Harry, his tail wagging, and then went bounding after a dust bunny. Between them, Creature and Padfoot seemed to have things under control, so Harry watched for a bit, and laughed when Padfoot skidded in a patch of dust and made a yelping noise that sounded impressively like a swear word, and was then coerced into playing a game of tag with his dog Godfather, while Creature continued to wage war on the dust bunnies. If the day was any indication of what was to come, Harry thought he was going to enjoy living with Padfoot very much indeed. Remus Lupin had thought his life was about as bad as it was possible to get. He had spent the past month at a werewolf camp, trying to talk sense into Greyback, who was getting restless again, and had bitten a girl a month back, and had returned only a week ago, with a number of new scars for his efforts, to learn that Sirius Black, his old friend turned enemy, had escaped from Azkaban. Very little wizarding news got through to the camps, unfortunately. As if this all wasn't bad enough, things had become 1,000 times worse by the arrival of a weary, and for the first time since Remus had known him, scared, Professor Dumbledore.
"I don't want the Aurors here,"
Remus said.
"I can handle Sirius if it comes to it."
"I'd thought as much," Dumbledore said quietly and then fell silent.
"It doesn't make sense,"
Remus said, his voice muffled because his face was buried in his scarred hands.
"Sirius."
Remus had decided long ago that he would still call Sirius Sirius, for the same reasons he had called Voldemort Voldemort.
"Didn't have to tell the Muggles he was taking Harry. It would have made more sense to just kidnap him." "I fear Sirius may have been unhinged by his time in Azkaban,"
Professor Dumbledore said, his eyes lacking their usual twinkle.
"What makes sense to him may seem like insanity to us." "Sirius was always a little mad,"
Remus admitted, a shadow of a smile crossing his face before he remembered what had happened and he forced it off.
"But I don't understand why he took him. Harry killed Voldemort, so maybe Sirius wants revenge, but if he was going to kill him then he'd have done it by now, surely? He wouldn't have even bothered to adopt him, he'd have just killed him and run." "You are forgetting the prophecy."
Remus had to think for a moment. James had sat him and Sirius down years ago and explained in an unusually serious voice that Voldemort was after Harry. Peter hadn't visited that day, he had been sick, and so he didn't know about it. Remus wished bitterly that Sirius had been the one who was sick and Peter had heard it instead. Lily and James might still. "No, I won't think about that." Remus forced his thoughts back to the prophecy. It took him a moment to remember it, and then a moment longer to identify the part Dumbledore was talking. He did, his heart gave a little leap.
"Either must die at the hand of the other,"
he breathed. Dumbledore looked older than Remus had ever seen.
"It is possible, of course, that Sirius killing Harry on Voldemort's orders would fulfill this,"
he said heavily.
"But Voldemort, as we know, takes prophecy very seriously. Sirius doubtless told him the entire thing when he swapped sides, and, if I am correct, Voldemort will want to kill Harry himself. Sirius will merely keep him captive until that time comes." "So Sirius won't hurt him,"
Remus said. Dumbledore closed his eyes.
"We have no guarantee of that. The only thing we can assume, and even then, not safely, is that Harry is alive." "We have to find him,"
Remus said, throwing himself to his feet to pace.
"Do you know anything that might help us find them?" "Are you asking if he's contacted me?"
Remus said, stopping mid-step.
"Are you saying I'm helping him?" "Remus, sit down,"
Dumbledore said with a sigh. Remus sat.
"I said nothing of the kind. I'm asking for your help, because you know him better than anyone else." "I thought I knew him,"
Remus muttered. He sighed loudly, throwing his head back.
"You said he went to London?"
he asked.
"Is Enid safe?" "Mrs. Pettigrew is under guard,"
Dumbledore assured him.
"She will be moved to a safe house within the week." "And Alice and Frank's boy? Neville?"
Remus asked, worried Sirius might be out to fulfill the prophecy.
"Minerva is there now."
Remus nodded, relieved.
"I have had it confirmed that Sirius visited the Leaky Cauldron." "I don't think he'd have gone in to see Tom,"
Remus said dryly.
he would have gone to Diagon Alley. Not nocturne.
Remus scrunched up his mouth and shook his head.
I can't see any reason for him to go there, especially if Harry was with him. Children stand out in Nocturne Alley.
Dumbledore nodded.
So he probably went for money,
Remus said, staring at the ceiling of his living room.
I know no one was looking for Harry yet, but even so, to take him out in public was risky, and not something he would have done if he didn't have to. Why money? Sirius didn't seem to care for it all that much during the order days. He doesn't, I don't think, but he's not foolish enough to think he can get by without it. And money is the only thing at Diagon Alley that can't be ordered by Owl. I'll ask the Ministry to send people there first thing tomorrow. Anything else? If I'm right about him going to Gringotts for money, then he's probably planning to stay in one place for a while. That makes me think he still has Harry with him. Has anyone checked his old flat? I made inquiries at the Ministry,
Dumbledore said.
It was reclaimed a year after he was sent to Azkaban. His belongings were taken as evidence and are being held in a Ministry-owned storage facility. The flat is currently inhabited, and under guard by Aurors in case Sirius decides to return. But he hasn't yet. Not as far as the Ministry or I are aware. Can you think of anywhere else Sirius would be compelled to stay? Hogwarts, maybe? James, Peter, Sirius, and I knew it better than anyone. There's no reason for him to go there, though. If Harry had been at school he might have, but he's not.
Remus thought hard for a moment. Potter Manor had been destroyed in the war and Lily and James' cottage in Godric's Hollow was in no state to be inhabited.
The only other one I can think of is Grimmauld Place, and Sirius hated. It's empty,
Dumbledore said.
Alastor searched it himself on Saturday and then again on Monday.
Harry was taken on Tuesday though, Remus thought. Dumbledore seemed to read his mind.
Marlene was told to keep an eye out and we've heard nothing.
Remus nodded and then sighed.
I really can't think where else he might have gone, Professor. Thank you for your help, then, Remus. I need to get back to Hogwarts, but I'll be in contact. Your insight into how Sirius thinks could well find Harry. That's it?
Remus asked flatly.
For now. I dare say the Aurors will have questions for you, but they'll be another day away, yet, I think. This is the only way I get to help? Answering questions. The only way? Remus, you've been invaluable. I want to be out there helping,
Remus said.
I want to be looking for him. He's James and Lily's son. He's my godson. Pardon. The night Harry was born, James and Sirius broke into the St. Mungo's administration room and put me down as Harry's godmother. It's not quite legal, but James wouldn't have done it if he didn't mean it.
Remus said all of this very quickly, too agitated to care that his usual calm demeanor was slipping and that he was very close to shouting.
Ah, yes, I do remember you telling me that. So do I. It was the night you took Harry to his aunt's house,
Remus said bitterly.
Remus, you know why I couldn't give you custody of the boy?
Dumbledore said.
I can understand you wanting to keep him safe, and wanting him to grow up out of the public eye,
Remus said frustrated. They had had this argument a number of times in the past.
I don't understand why you forbade me to have any contact with him. And I certainly don't know why I couldn't get to know him after Sirius broke out. Harry would have been safer with me. You could have put up wards, maybe not as strong as they were with Petunia, but strong enough, and I would have been able to protect him. Remus, You know why I couldn't do that? I'm dangerous for one night a month. He could have gone to Arabella's, or back to his aunt's for the full moon and stayed with me for the rest of the time. The ministry would not have approved,
Dumbledore interrupted.
Since when have you cared what the ministry do and don't like?
Remus said.
The last thing we needed was for the ministry to worry about your ability to care for him and remove him from your custody and mine. The last thing we needed was for Sirius to bloody kidnap him.
Remus shouted. With a shaky breath, he leaned back against the wall.
I'm sorry, Professor,
he said, burying his face in his hands.
There is no need to apologize,
Dumbledore said, resting a hand on Remus' trembling shoulder. With it, Remus was surprised to find, was a scent of guilt. So Professor Dumbledore wishes things had been different now too.
You being upset is understandable, and you being angry is even more so. I really do need to get back to the school, but I'll see what I can do about getting you involved with the search. Thank you,
Remus said, his voice muffled.
There's flu powder on the mantel. Yes, I remember. Take care, Remus, and let me know if you think of anything else. Headmaster's office, Hogwarts.
There was a whooshing sound and then he was gone. Remus slid down the wall to the floor and began to cry. Harry ran into the library, eyes looking for a hiding place. He immediately discounted the bookshelf-covered walls. He'd never get to the top in time, the desk was fixed to the wall, so hiding under that wouldn't work. Harry ran out onto the second-floor landing, nearly bowling Creature over in the process.
Sorry,
he said hastily as the elf glared at him. Padfoot had threatened to free him after one particularly nasty comment, and Creature was a little edgy around the pair of them now. Even though Padfoot had no intention of following through with it, Padfoot had explained to Harry that Creature would remain in the house, if only so he didn't go running off and tell the Ministry of Magic where Harry and Padfoot were. Harry, resigned to Creature's company for the foreseeable future, was determined to be civil, despite not liking the elf awfully much.
The Potter brat needs to watch where he's going,
Creature said to the moth-eaten carpet.
Creature could have been hurt. Not that Master would have cared. Master's a heartless wretch. Do you think you could take me downstairs with your APPR rating thing?
Harry asked breathlessly. Yesterday afternoon, Padfoot had played around with a tapestry in the drawing room and managed to bind Creature to Harry. While the elf now had to obey Harry's orders, Harry, who was well used to being ordered around, felt it was politer to ask.
Please.
He added.
The brat has legs, but he wants Creature to do his moving for him. Oh, yes. Poor mistress would weep to see Creature used as a form of transport. I'm hiding from Padfoot,
Harry said.
It's a game. And if Padfoot finds me, he wins, but if he can't, I win.
Harry had learned very quickly that Creature liked Padfoot about as much as Padfoot liked Creature, which wasn't much at all. He had learned that either would do anything to spite the other. Padfoot liked to talk louder than was necessary about how horrible his mother had been, and Creature liked to try to find loopholes in the simplest orders.
He won't have realized I can get downstairs, because he's on the first floor. Master doesn't like to lose,
Creature said gleefully. He fixed Harry with a curious look and then held out his hand. Harry took it. Creature's bony fingers tightened on his and then they were both being squeezed. Harry's ears popped and he felt like he was being pulled through a tube, and then, before he was fully aware of it, he was standing in the kitchen. He grabbed the edge of the table for fear of toppling over.
Thanks,
he panted, trying to reorient himself.
At least the brat has manners,
Creature muttered. Harry ignored this and set about making tea. He figured that by the time Padfoot realized he wasn't upstairs, tea would be ready and they could have a break before they went back to cleaning.
"Would you like some?"
he asked Creature as he fumbled with the polished silver teacups in the dresser. Creature stared as if he had never seen Harry before.
"Creature." "No,"
Creature said slowly.
"No, Creature is too busy for tea. Master would never let Creature rest for tea." "Padfoot won't mind,"
Harry said, carrying everything back to the kitchen bench.
"No, no tea,"
Creature said. His ears flapped as he shook his head.
"The Potter brat should sit down. Creature will pour. Master would never forgive Creature if the little brat burned himself on the kettle."
The elf wandered over and shooed Harry away from the bench.
"Master likes scones with his tea,"
Creature muttered.
"Oh, yes," Creature remembers, "scones with jam." "Do you want help?"
Harry asked, getting up from his place at the kitchen table.
"No, no. Creature lives to serve the House of Black,"
Creature said, snapping his fingers. Flour, sugar, and eggs floated from the pantry. Harry was suddenly very glad they'd emptied and restocked the pantry the day before, since Creature probably would have made scones regardless of whether the ingredients were fresh or not. When Padfoot finally came downstairs, almost an hour after Harry and Creature, Harry was on his third scone and his teacup was almost empty.
"Figured it out, did you?"
Harry asked, spreading more jam onto his scone.
"No,"
Padfoot grumbled, having recovered from looking surprised.
"I thought you might have been somewhere in my old bedroom." "Why'd you come downstairs then?" "I smelled food,"
Padfoot said with a sheepish smile. Harry sniggered and passed him a teacup.
"You've been productive." "Thank Creature,"
Harry said, taking a bite of his scone.
"Creature,"
Padfoot said, freezing with his spoon suspended over the sugar pot. He shot a look at the now rather depleted plate of scones.
"Creature made the scones?"
he asked sharply.
"And the tea,"
Harry said, unfazed.
"So he is good for something,"
Padfoot said, frowning at Creature's den.
"Who'd have known?"
Harry frowned too, but at his godfather. Padfoot noticed and sighed, making a face.
"Thank you, Creature,"
he called. Creature mumbled something from behind his den door. Harry's expression cleared instantly, making Padfoot grin.
"What?"
Harry asked.
"Your mum used to use that same look when James and I were invited to ministry events and had to make conversation with stuffy old politicians."
Harry grinned.
"Some of them were the most conceited bastards I've ever met and all of them were so boring they could put an insomniac into hibernation, but we still had to be nice."
Harry laughed into his teacup. Padfoot stared at him for a moment, then at his own untouched teacup and then at the plate of scones.
"These had better not be poisoned,"
he said warningly. Harry snorted tea up his nose. They spent the rest of the day in the first-floor bathroom. Like the rest of the house, snakes seemed to be a prevalent decoration. The cabinet handles, doorknob, taps and shower head were all serpentine, trying to restore it to some level of functionality. Padfoot had had Creature help. The elf had managed to get the toilet working again, but he had also had driven them both mad with his endless muttering, so Padfoot had sent him away again.
"This reminds me of detention,"
he said fondly, spraying the sink with a jet of soapy water from his wand.
"They made you clean sinks?"
Harry asked in disbelief. Padfoot smiled at his shocked expression.
"The entire prefect's bathroom,"
he said ruefully.
"And we weren't allowed to use magic, either." "What did you do to earn that?"
Harry asked, dropping his sponge. Padfoot smiled in a way that Harry was getting to know very well. sheepish, but with no trace of regret for doing whatever it was he had done.
"It was James' idea," he said. "The Slytherin prefect, Yaxley, I think his name was a real arse to us. Always calling James and me blood traitors and giving Moony a hard time because he had hand-me-down robes. Prongs already fancied your mum." "Is Prongs my dad?"
Harry asked, confused. Padfoot looked shocked.
"I haven't told you that yet."
Harry shook his head. Padfoot groaned.
"Sorry, kiddo, yes, James was Prongs. Remus was Moony, you know that one, I'm Padfoot and Peter was Wormtail." "Hang on,"
Harry said, staring at his godfather.
"Your name isn't Padfoot?" "No,"
Padfoot said. Harry stared at him.
"It's serious. Surely you've heard Creature say it." "Sirius Black,"
Harry mused, attacking a particularly stubborn piece of soap scum with his sponge.
"No, I haven't, he only calls you master."
Padfoot, Sirius, sniggered.
"So why did you have nicknames?" "For our animagus forms. Padfoot for a dog, Wormtail for a rat." "What were Moony and Prongs?" "Moony was a wolf,"
Padfoot said, his expression changing slightly.
"Prongs was a stag." "Was my mum an animagus too?"
Padfoot shook his head. Harry took a moment to absorb this. Then,
"So what did you do to the prefect's bathroom?"
Padfoot grinned.
"As I was saying, Yaxley was a real git. He thought he was better than your mum, because he had wizarding relatives and she didn't, remember the M word?"
Harry nodded and then laughed.
"He didn't like her because her parents weren't magical? That's stupid." "That's what the whole war was about,"
he said gravely. Harry's eyebrows shot up.
"But you're completely right, it is stupid. We decided to get back at him for that." "How?" "I wanted to put something in his food,"
Padfoot said, testing to see if the tap worked. Orange, rusty water sprayed in all directions out of the serpent's mouth and he hastily turned it off again and shook like a dog.
"Make him grow a beard, turn his hair pink, something like that." Prongs didn't think that was good enough. "I can't remember if it was Moony or your dad that did it, but someone got their hands on a live squid, we put a few charms on it to make it smarter and able to survive in bathwater, and we also spelled its ink to be sticky, and managed to get it into the pipes just before Yaxley's bath." "Where'd it go wrong?" "What makes you think it did?" "You said you got caught,"
Harry said.
"I blame Moony,"
Padfoot sniffed.
"As our researcher he should have mentioned that the charms we cast on the squid to add qualities to its ink would react with the engorgement charms in the bubble taps." "So what happened?"
Harry asked, trying not to laugh at the image that was forming in his head.
"The squid grew,"
Padfoot said with a barking laugh. He touched the tap with his wand again, muttering something under his breath and then turned it on. It ran normally, with nice, clear water.
"The thing had no idea what was going on and sprayed ink everywhere, extra sticky ink, I might add." "Did it get Yaxley?" "Oh, yes,"
Padfoot said happily.
"Yes, I don't think he was properly clean for a month. But it also got us, Prongs, Moony, Peter and I trailed ink from the prefect's bathroom to our dormitory."
Harry winced sympathetically.
"Old Minnie was not happy when she found out." "Minnie?" "Professor Minerva McGonagall," Padfoot said. "Head of Transfiguration and also the head of Gryffindor House." "Was she strict?"
Harry asked. Her title certainly implied it.
"Yes, but fair, too, even if we didn't think so at the time. You'll see what I mean in a few years. When you go to Hogwarts,
Padfoot said, giving him a funny look.
Didn't we talk about this during dinner? Right,
Harry said, remembering. He gave his godfather a sheepish smile.
Sorry.
Padfoot grinned, picking up his sponge.
Don't worry about it. But, when you get there, to Hogwarts, I mean, make sure you have a look in the lake. Why? Let's just say a certain, very large cephalopod with extremely sticky ink now calls the lake home. Bloody buggering hell,
Padfoot said emphatically on the third day. He dropped a newspaper onto the table.
What?
Harry said, lowering his spoon.
I'd half hoped Dumbledore and the Ministry would want to keep this quiet. That I kidnapped you,
Padfoot said with a strained smile. He sighed at the paper and pushed it toward Harry.
They've organized a search.
Harry stared at his photo on the front page of the newspaper, which was right beside one of Padfoot, snarling at the photographer.
How did they get my school photo? And why's it moving?
He remembered the day it had been taken. Earlier in the day, Dudley had shoved him and he had shoved Dudley back, just in time for Mrs. Peterson to see. She had lectured him on treating his classmates with respect and proceeded to keep him in her sight for the rest of the day to make sure he wasn't going to hurt anyone else. She had been standing behind the photographer when Harry's photo was taken, glaring at him. It really wasn't surprising that Harry's photographic self looked so terrified.
Your aunt must have had a copy,
Padfoot said, sounding distracted.
And they'll have enchanted it to move because wizards aren't used to still photographs.
Hey, Harry said, beginning to read the article. The kidnapping of Harry Potter, the child we all know as the other boy who lived, pictured above, has put doubts about safety from he who must not be named's followers into the minds of the magical community for the first time in 7 years. It is believed that mass murderer Sirius Black, also pictured above, approached Potter at a playground near his little whinging home on Tuesday night and persuaded him to leave his Muggle relatives, who, thankfully, were not harmed during the abduction. Albus Dumbledore was responsible for sending the boy to live with the Muggles in the first place and is now facing open criticism from the public for not moving the boy sooner.
The Potter boy should have been moved as soon as Black escaped,
said one witch from Bath.
Or at the very least, the house should have been placed under Auror supervision.
In his statement last night, Albus Dumbledore admitted he himself had thought Harry would be safe in the wards he set up around the little whinging home shortly after the defeat of He Who Must Not Be Named. Junior Cursebreaker William Weasley spoke to reporters after investigating the property.
I don't know what happened,
said Weasley.
As far as I can tell, the wards were fully operational on Tuesday night and started to decay very late Tuesday or possibly even early Wednesday. All I know is they're gone now.
He also stated that the wards were strong and that such rapid decay isn't normal. Clearly Black is behind it. After leaving the little whinging household, it is believed Black altered his and Potter's appearance before hailing the night bus which took them to the Leaky Cauldron in London. Jeremy Phillips, the night bus conductor, conversed with the two without noticing anything unusual.
They seemed nice to me, like a normal father and son,
he said during his interview this morning.
I didn't suspect a thing, but I suppose that's a good thing, because I don't have any special training. I might have ended up like Pettigrew.
Staff from Gringotts Wizarding Bank confirmed Black and Potter visited and made a withdrawal from the Black family vault, though no figure has been given to Aurors or reporters. When questioned on the topic, staff refused to give any details other than the fact the two were there, due to everything else being private. Aurors are currently investigating the possibility of Black having a goblin accomplice, but so far, the goblins are adamant they will not to become involved in wizarding affairs. Black and Potter's whereabouts remain unknown, though they are believed to have stayed in Britain. In a statement this morning, Minister Bagnold urges anyone with any information about either Black or Potter to contact the Auror office immediately. She also reminded the public that Black is in possession of his wand and so should not be approached directly. In addition to the investigation led by the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, wealthy ministry benefactor Lucius Malfoy has agreed to finance a search led by volunteers.
I find it heartbreaking,
said Mr. Malfoy as he left the ministry last night,
that a child as young and helpless as little Harry Potter is in the possession of a man like Sirius Black. As a father of two boys the same age as young Potter, I felt it was my moral duty to assist in any way possible. My wife and I both feel that a little of our gold is a small price to pay for Potter's rescue.
Mr. Malfoy has also stated he will be joining the search himself when he has the time and is pushing for others to do the same.
I do not believe a few hours of my time, or anyone's time for that matter, is more important than the life of a child. Anyone interested in helping may contact me via OWL and I will assign them an appropriate role in the search.
Until he is found, our thoughts go out to Harry Potter, who is no doubt terrified, and to his Muggle relatives, who must have been shaken by the abduction.
Shaken?
Harry said, choking back a laugh.
Did they talk to the Dursleys at all?
Padfoot said, still sounding distant.
Oh, probably not.
His chair scraped as he got up to make himself a cup of tea.
Do you want one?
Harry shook his head.
What did you think of the rest of it?
Padfoot asked guardedly, gesturing toward the paper.
I don't know,
Harry said, staring at the headline, "The Boy Who Disappeared."
Everyone seems really worried. I told you there'd be people after us,
Padfoot said, sitting down again.
I just didn't realize there were so many people who'd be looking,
Harry said, scratching polish off the table with his fingernail. Padfoot blew on his steaming tea before looking up at Harry again.
They don't even know me.
He was surprised to see that Padfoot looked upset.
I've made a real mess of this,
Padfoot said, dropping his head into his hands.
What do you mean?
Harry asked, staring at his soggy cereal.
Stupid,
he muttered.
I should have just left you there.
Harry stared at his godfather, who was still face down on the table. He waited a few seconds for Padfoot to say something, but he didn't. Hurt and confused, Harry pushed his chair away from the table and stood. Padfoot made a funny sniffing noise and then looked up, confused.
Harry?
He asked, looking puzzled. Harry turned and walked up the kitchen stairs. He didn't know if he was happy or sad that he couldn't hear Padfoot's footsteps behind him. End of chapter.